Chapter 1044. Of course, Yuchi wasn't the only one who received this sort of temporary upgrade. In addition, the volunteers of Team AB had more or less their relatives accompanying them. It seemed that a wave had already arrived before them. But the men in black suits used violent methods to clear out Bob's temporary office and the corridor outside. They also effectively separated the parties involved. This sort of method was crude but effective. As for whether it was illegal or not, who cared? We can't count on Bob. I just tried to contact Bai Xinyan, but she didn't get through. She didn't respond to my message either. Smith glanced at the man in black, who was monitoring them, and cursed. He couldn't continue because Yuchi was staring straight at him. Yuchi's face was blue and his eyes were bloodshot. Smith had been a broker for a long time. He knew that he was facing the backlash of his clients. Even if he had a clear conscience, there was no reason to talk about this at a time like this. As for the fact that the experiment wasn't really risky, there was no need to even mention it. In the end, Yuchi was still a rational person. He knew that venting or taking out his anger was meaningless at a time like this. At this time, Yuchi's mind was also very chaotic. He even considered bringing Yu Zheng along to escape from this giant ship. Fortunately, he quickly eliminated this kind of irrational fantasy. He tried to use his rationality to find an opportunity. Is there anyone else who can contact Dr. Clay directly? It would be good to have a word with him. Convince him to change people or use fewer people. Anything is fine. As long as little Zheng can escape, the sponsorship fee is negotiable. Smith nodded and didn't say much. He operated his wristband again. Yuchi wasn't idle either. He had some connections in the New World and Luoyang City. Even if those connections weren't enough, he could still go to Xia City and ask for help. Even if it didn't have any real effect, it would be good to make Dr. Clay and his experimental team hesitate for a bit. The two men could be considered rather accomplished. They stood in the corner of the corridor and madly made phone calls. But it didn't take long for reality to tell them. There was always a gap between hopes. This was very normal. There was no need to involve specific people. As long as it was a problem related to the mutation infection, it was extremely sensitive and taboo. Not to mention, they were far away in the middle of the ocean. They were situated in an extremely delicate geographical and social environment. The Jade Light. Who would easily open their mouths and make a promise upon hearing the name. The other party didn't even need to refuse. Just by saying that they wanted to understand the situation, a few hours, half a day, or even an entire night would pass. Yuchi was also a sophisticated person, so he had a basic judgment of these things. The more people he contacted, the colder his heart became. It was the same for Smith. Even if he didn't feel a chill in his heart, he felt more and more awkward standing next to Yuchi. He urgently needed to come up with a decent solution, but in the end, he could only come up with something that was better than nothing. York, I think we should start with Bai Xinyan. Even though she rejected us, we know where she is. We can look for her directly, or through her father. Didn't you say that we worked together before? Daydream? At this moment, when he said this name, he felt even more awkward, but it could also be considered a path. Smith and Yuchi were stunned. They seemed to have thought of something at the same time. The former raised his voice and asked, what was it called again? Yuchi did not answer. He immediately turned around and rushed to Zone C12. Smith hurried to catch up. It was probably because the increased blood circulation stimulated his brain. He recalled the name. Luonan, right? Is he sure he's still here? Yuchi still did not speak. He just operated his wristband to confirm that he didn't have Luonan's number. He quickly switched to a different person and sent out a communication request. The target was his daughter, who was several thousand kilometers away. His mood was about to explode, but he forcefully suppressed his emotions after connecting. He became gentle and calm, even slowing down his footsteps to maintain the stability of his breathing. Chin, you're not in class, right? That's good. It's fine. Don't worry. It's fine as long as your brother torments himself. Yuchi chatted with his daughter for a bit with absolute willpower before finally getting to the main topic. Oh right, Chin. I accidentally saw someone here just now. That's right. You know him. You mentioned him before. He's a very mysterious schoolmate. He's the one little Zheng offended. I just brushed shoulders with him and just remembered. I didn't have time to say hello. Yeah. I'm very curious as well. Why did he come here? Do you have his contact information? It's nothing. It's just too much of a coincidence to bump into him on an ocean cruise. It's good to get in touch and deepen our relationship. Dad can't miss out on such a powerful young person in Xia City. Smith spread his hands to the side. It must be said that Yu Qi's ability to control his emotions was quite decent. He was unable to hear any sense of anxiety from the tone he used to converse with his daughter. But since he was going to lie, the logic behind his words wasn't tight enough. Hopefully, the other side wouldn't be able to tell. Looking at Yu Qi's expression, he had indeed deceived his daughter. The problem was that Yu Qi's friendship with the other side didn't seem to have reached the point of exchanging numbers. Yu Qi's face was filled with unconcealable disappointment, but he quickly roused his spirits and said to the other side, "This is a rare opportunity. I remember that you're friends with his relatives." Help Dad ask. Okay, send it over in a bit. The call ended, and Yu Qi's brows furrowed even tighter. Smith saw the situation and said some nonsense. Let's go over there first. Maybe we'll bump into him. Yu Qi didn't know what he was thinking. He was a bit absent-minded. Smith called out to him, and he woke up with a start. He tossed the little doubt that he hadn't straightened out to the back of his mind. He nodded in agreement and sped up again. Naturally, he didn't know that thousands of kilometers away, in Xia City 6th High, his daughter had already made a decision. She dialed a number that she claimed she didn't know. On the cruise ship, which was as complicated as a maze, almost everyone had their own goal, whether it was an internal drive or an external drive. Toolman number 1 accepted a strange order and found the express passageway leading to Area C. He entered an elevator that was on the way. He came out in a hurry. He didn't even wrap up the hot notebook with anything to cover it. It wasn't appropriate to hold it in his hand. In the end, he did what Black Lion did and put it in his bosom. The problem was that this notebook was really hot. That wasn't a description. Toolman number 1 was in the outer circle of the inner world. He was certain that this notebook definitely possessed some special magic. Ever since he put it in his bosom, it had been emitting heat. It was so hot that it made one's heart wrinkle. At the same time, there was a slight vibration. Of course, it was possible that this was an illusion. In any case, it was absolutely right to get rid of such a hot item as soon as possible. Up until now, there hadn't been any strange people asking him for it. He just hoped that the elevator would hurry up and enter Area C's exhibition hall so that he could put the item in its proper place. However, the elevator was for public use. It was normal for people to get on it midway. After crossing 2 floors, the elevator door opened, and a colleague, wearing the same black suit and black sunglasses, walked in. The moment the elevator door opened, the identification device came into play. It was a real colleague. The two of them didn't have any expression. They nodded as a greeting. The newcomer stood on the other side of the car, putting some distance between them. In their line of work, being careful with their words and actions was the most important thing. If it wasn't necessary, they absolutely wouldn't inquire about each other or strike up a conversation. Silence was the most reassuring atmosphere. The problem was that Toolman number 1's calm state of mind didn't last more than 2 seconds before it was broken. The elevator door closed and the car started moving. The colleague who came in turned to him. His gaze was fixed on him through the sunglasses. "Can I take a look at the notebook in your bosom?" Chapter 1045. The colleague spoke very politely, and he had a magnetic subwoofer that made other men envious. But when these elements were combined with what he said, it made Toolman number 1's already overheated heart almost explode. "Can I?" Toolman number 1's body instinctively tensed up, and he almost got into a defensive posture. But at this moment, Black Lion's instructions flickered in his heart. If you meet someone on the way and ask for it, just give it to them. This order dispelled all his subjective initiative. Toolman number 1 was stunned for half a second before he hurriedly took out the notebook from his chest and offered it with both hands. The colleague also politely received it with both hands. He rubbed it twice in his hands, as though he was inspecting the material. Then, he opened the notebook and flipped through it. Toolman number 1 very consciously blocked out the following scene. He looked straight ahead and only stared at the panel of the elevator, as though it contained the ultimate secret to his promotion and salary increase. The elevator continued to descend, and the colleague beside him flipped through the notebook very gently and subtly. Apart from the occasional sound of paper rubbing against each other, there was no other movement. As a result, the slight noise of the maglev elevator became especially clear. This was definitely the most difficult period of Toolman number 1's life. It was extremely long. He was already thinking about whether he should press a button midway and directly escape. Anyway, the notebook had already been given, hadn't it? However, when he had this thought, the colleague seemed to have seen through his thoughts. He still spoke gently with the magnetic subwoofer. "It won't take too long. I'll return it to you. I don't want it." No one would care about the true thoughts of a tool man. Regardless of whether the other party's attitude was firm or gentle, after this sentence, the sound of paper rubbing against each other suddenly rang out. Toolman number 1 thought that the other party had sped up the speed of flipping pages, but he didn't expect to hear a soft sigh beside him. "What's wrong?" Puzzled, he turned his head and looked at the notebook in his colleague's hands. At the same time, a voice sounded in the car again. "Flip faster? It's best to get a general idea first." Toolman number 1 was stunned. Why does this voice sound so familiar? No, why are his lips, teeth, and tongue moving? He shuddered violently. The sudden thought in his mind was like a firecracker, exploding his brain into chaos. The area below his neck was cold, as if he was numb from the cold and had lost all feeling. But no matter what, he still moved his lips and spoke clearly. "This is getting interesting. If it were me, I'd change the order of these loose-leaf binders." Tool number 1's eyes were about to burst, but he couldn't see the source of the dominating power that defied his will. All he saw was that his colleague didn't even raise his head as he replied in a calm tone, "It's better to keep things as they are." Toolman number 1's tongue continued to move. "When Baiji came to me, I didn't think much of it. But now, it seems like it's a waste of God's gift in your hands. Should I agree to it? Or, you can just give it to me or hand it over to my stupid disciple." "I'm sorry, Lady Necromancer. I promised my colleague, you don't have to worry about me, don't worry about me." Toolman number 1 froze on the spot. His eyes were painful and hot, and he was about to cry. He really wanted to repeat the order that Black Lion had given him, but it was difficult for him to do so. At this moment he heard a ding. The elevator arrived. Almost at the same time, he also clearly felt his lips and teeth close. His tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, causing air to rush into his nostrils, and he let out a heavy grunt. Toolman number 1's head turned forward again. It had nothing to do with his own will. He saw that the elevator doors slid open, and there were already people waiting outside. There were 5 of them, both men and women. Standing in the middle was a surprisingly young man. They didn't make way, nor did they want to enter. However, their eyes were focused on the colleague beside him. To be precise, they were looking at the notebook in the colleague's hand. Toolman number 1's mind had been crushed by the continuous invisible dominating power. He had almost lost his ability to think normally. He could only mechanically observe and reflect the situation around him. Or perhaps he was just observing on his behalf. At this time, the colleague beside him raised his head. Through his sunglasses, he met face to face with the people outside the elevator. His hands were still in the position of flipping the pages. After half a second, he opened his mouth as calmly as usual. "Can you watch a bit longer? Do you want to watch a bit longer?" The subwoofer of the colleague and the voice of the young man in the middle of the 5 seemed to coincide together. Both sides probably didn't expect such a coincidence. The air froze for a moment, and it was still the young man who took the lead. He moved slightly to the side, making way for the outside passage. "You're here, right? Please help yourself." The colleague bowed slightly to the person outside the door. "Many thanks. Mr. Luonan. Nice to meet you." He walked out of the elevator in a very natural manner. Toolman number 1 followed him like a walking corpse. he actually observed that the gaze of the young man, Luo Nan, had a clear pause on his own face. At this time, a middle-aged man wearing a flowery shirt and shorts chuckled. "Brother Tugu, you dumped your boss again?" The colleague slightly raised his eyes and nodded toward the flowery shirt middle-aged man. "Hello, Mr. Blood Demon. I don't have any missions for now." Blood Demon introduced the young man, Luo Nan. "His name is Tugu. He's the most carefree security personnel in the world. He leaves his employer and runs all over the world. Right? He's been employed by Wang Yu for many years. If there's a conflict, you must be careful of him." "Oh, is that so?" Luo Nan's gaze moved away from Tool Man Number One's face and turned to look at Tugu. Right now, he was like a young man truly driven by curiosity. Though he agreed to Tu Ji's request to borrow the notebook, he quickly walked over to Tu Ji's side. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Tugu and they watched together. Of course, Luo Nan was at most 170 centimeters tall. Tu Ji's physique was robust, over 190 centimeters. There was a clear difference in height between the two. Therefore, Luo Nan simply left the ground with his toes and floated in the air. He was like a ghost floating behind Tu Ji's shoulder. Blood Demon clicked his tongue twice. This method of borrowing is passable, unlike some people. Tool Man Number One saw Blood Demon and the short-haired beauty turn their gazes in his direction. He subconsciously felt a bit dizzy as he faced those dim yellow and bright eyes. His mouth began to squirm again at this time, producing a sound. It's hard to say who's borrowing who. Chapter 1046. The words spoken by Death Witch, who was controlling Tool Man Number One, were clearly provocative. However, Luo Nan didn't pay any attention to her. He was still like a backstage spirit with no sense of existence. He flipped through the contents of the notebook with Tugu. He looked at whatever Tugu looked at. He had a very good temper. Forget about Death Witch, even Blood Demon and Wan Lu Hua didn't expect Luo Nan to be this calm. Luo Nan, who had an eccentric personality and was especially sensitive when it came to family matters, to be this sensitive. This wasn't just the case on the surface. The elevator room everyone was currently in was approximately 30 square meters. It was quite spacious on the cruise ship. However, if 5 extraordinaries or the convergence of extraordinaries' consciousnesses were included, the space would suddenly become narrow. Everyone was a highly sensitive person. Their bodies and souls formed their own domains. They were so close to each other, and their energies intertwined with each other on the mental plane. They needed to be especially careful in controlling their energies, and their minds were more or less stretched. Under these circumstances, any fluctuations on the material and mental planes, especially clear hostility and malice, could lead to a tense and even uncontrollable situation. It wasn't just the people present. The extraordinaries in the other areas of the cruise ship, and even some of the weaker mental experts, all sensed the powerful tension that suddenly converged and balanced each other. For a time, the mental space projected by the tens of thousands of living beings on the jadeite light became a bit quiet. The chanting that reverberated within grew louder and louder. It had to be said that the 2 key figures in the elevator hall were doing exceptionally well in the current situation. One was Tugu. He held the fatal notebook in his hand. It could be said that he was standing in the eye of the storm. But from beginning to end, whether it was when he was communicating with Death Witch in the elevator car or when he saw Luo Nan after the elevator doors opened, he never revealed any hostile intent. The energy and blood of his body were restrained and well organized. There was not the slightest bit of sharpness. To be able to do this in an environment filled with extraordinaries was not easy. Admittedly, there was a factor in his personality, but his ability to restrain himself was truly admirable. The other person who did this extremely well was Luo Nan. No one knew why he was able to be this calm. Ripples formed from the short mantra of 16 words still reverberated within his sea of consciousness and above the abyss. They were arranged like scriptures and filled with fine smoke. They were constantly announcing the existence of his will. However, it was merely an announcement. With the passage of time, the thunderous impact from the very beginning gradually faded away, probably around the time when Black Lion sent the notebook out of the country. On the mental plane, Luo Nan's power functioned just like his own mental senses. It flowed naturally, faintly discernible. Even if there were occasional fluctuations, they did not bring about any direct pressure or threat to the sensitive extraordinaries on the ship. At most, she would think that he was too noisy, but you should at least allow a transcendent to be a little willful, right? This was the right of the strong. This peculiar sense of existence, from the initial ostentatiousness, slowly settled down until people got used to it, achieving a kind of running-in result. Moreover, Luo Nan had been able to protect these results up until now. Be it when he saw Tu Gu or when he faced the death, which he maintained a certain level of stability. He completely ignored the latter's provocation. No one knew what he was thinking, at least no one could detect it. As a result, the death which couldn't find a chance to act up. That was quite impressive. Blood Demon subconsciously scratched his chin. A few hours ago, he had evaluated Luo Nan, saying that the young man was quiet and didn't have any substantive ideas. He was pushed all the way to his doorstep. Now, could this be considered as a counterattack? Practically everyone in the elevator room had their own plans, but they restrained themselves. The atmosphere wasn't tense, but it was rather stiff. This elevator room was one of the fast passageways connecting area C and D, so the flow of people was quite dense. In the eyes of the extraordinaries, such an odd atmosphere was rare and precious. However, by Xinyan, Talker, and the others were more strained. And so on and so forth. At least 2 waves of guests had already passed through this place, and they had been scared back. Finally, Tu Gu flipped to the last page of the notebook. Just like in the elevator, he sighed softly. His fingers even flipped back a few pages, as if he wanted to read it one more time. Luo Nan didn't stop him, but in the end, Tu Gu still closed the notebook. He turned to the side, pulling away a bit from Luo Nan, and returned the notebook with both hands. Many thanks. Luo Nan actually didn't take the notebook in the first instance. Instead, he asked, "You're not going to read it? I can't understand it, and I can't tell it apart. Let's not read it." Luo Nan nodded. He extended his hands and took the notebook back, achieving a handover that made most people sigh in secret. A second later, Luo Nan flipped open the leather cover of the notebook. Sure enough, there were 16 words on the title page, as well as the tetrahedron and its inscribed circumscribed sphere structure. Compared to the 2 books Luo Nan had placed in Xia City and the 2 books burned by the horned demon, the handwriting on this page was a bit neater. There were no traces of a second erasure. He didn't flip to the back. He closed the notebook and raised his head to look at Tu Gu. "May I ask your opinion?" Luo Nan's tone and words were extremely polite. Tu Gu couldn't find a reason to refuse. He thought seriously for a moment, but his answer was very simple. "Mr. Luo Yuandao, you must have had a hard time back then." Luo Nan didn't say anything after hearing this. He just bowed slightly toward Tu Gu. Tu Gu returned the bow and said, "Then I'll take my leave first." From beginning to end, these 2 people communicated in an exceptionally polite and courteous atmosphere. It was as if there was a special tacit understanding between the 2, but it made everyone else who saw it feel like they were in the clouds. After exchanging pleasantries, Tu Gu, who said that he was about to leave, turned his gaze to Tool Man number 1 and said, "You're not leaving?" No one knew whether the target of his conversation was with Tool Man number 1 or Death Witch. The Death Shaman could roughly tell that this supernatural who floated around and wandered about without a trace was never someone who was easy to deal with. So, he ordered the Tool Man to move his lips again. "Now who do you think has had a hard time? Is there anyone who would actually take it seriously?" Aside from clear mockery, Death Witch also stabbed at the pit of the stomach. But when these words were spoken, not only did 2G's sunglasses-covered face not change, even Luo Nan only lowered his head to look at the cover of the notebook in his hand. He didn't flip through it, but it looked like he was lost in thought. As for the others, they all knew how to play deaf and mute. For a person of status, there was nothing more embarrassing than being ignored by others. No matter how eccentric Death Witch's temperament was, he still cared about his face. He really couldn't continue to be entangled here, so he simply snorted coldly and abandoned the temporary Tool Man. He plunged into the depths of the sea of consciousness and disappeared without a trace. Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, who had been seriously observing the layout of the elevator hall, glanced at each other. It was very clear that this old woman definitely bore a grudge against everyone present. Speaking of which, was there an extraordinary in this world that she didn't hate? Blood Demon didn't take this seriously. He didn't care about Tool Man number 1, who had fallen limply to the ground. He reached out to pat Luo Nan's shoulder. "Today, I'm going to have a whole new level of respect for you." The latter half of Blood Demon's words came to an abrupt halt. Blood Demon awkwardly watched as his palm directly embedded itself into Luo Nan's shoulder. This caused Luo Nan's water vapor body, which wasn't very translucent, to turn half illusory. It looked like it could dissipate into nothingness at any moment. Chapter 1047. In the exhibition hall, everyone was discussing the hook Luo Nan left behind. They were guessing the subsequent developments and changes. It was a very deep and interesting matter. However, the brief confrontation in the elevator hall, not far away, more or less caught people's attention. For normal people, the Jade Light was a city on the sea. The space was vast and the content was rich. One might not be able to finish playing it in a week or two. However, for existences on the level of extraordinaries, this giant steel ship was basically no different from a small dinghy when they clashed and fought with each other. There was practically no buffer, especially for the mental side. Plus, everyone had their own standpoints. The scene of a chaotic battle was enough to make one's scalp ache. As his thoughts changed subtly, the discussion could be postponed for the time being. Constance and the Star Shaman bade farewell to Her Majesty Empress Wu and left together. Star Shaman walked away from Her Majesty Empress Wu's line of sight, and his footsteps clearly sped up. Constance followed without batting an eyelid. Her gaze was slightly lowered as she watched Star Shaman's fingers twitch unconsciously as he walked. She frowned, but she did not say anything in the end. Constance did not speak. Her consciousness reverberated on the mental plane. It was Death Shaman, who had just finished his confrontation with Luo Nan. Everyone was very familiar with each other, so there were no pleasantries. Death Shaman went straight to the point. The notebook is indeed valuable. At the very least, there is perceptible, metaphysical information sealed within. That bastard by G. He just wants the world to be in chaos. Constance was a bit puzzled. Luo Nan seems to have gotten the news a bit too early. Bai Ji is looking for external help all over the world. He might be deliberately leaking information. How big is this circle? There are more than 1 or 2 blabbermouths. Death Shaman did not like wasting time on such boring matters. He was a bit impatient. "Are you done yet?" Immediately, Star Shaman finally joined in. His teacher's powerful consciousness gave him a lot of pressure, even for an extraordinary like him. To reach a state of coordination and sharing required considerable skill, patience, and trust. Although it was said to be immediately, it had to wait until the 2 extraordinaries carried Death Shaman's drifting consciousness back to their own rooms. Only then did they truly reach a state of perfect coordination. Star Shaman did not delay any further. His right hand directly drew in the virtual workspace, reproducing the chaotic lines, words, and graphics that Death Shaman had seen in the notebook. Obviously, this was controlled by the Death Witch's consciousness. But now, no one cared about these minor details. The 3 extraordinary consciousnesses were all focused on these simple yet messy handwriting, attempting to rearrange and deal with them. But how could it be that easy? Constance was one of the top spirit formation masters in the world, and he had a deep understanding of ancient and modern runes and symbols. However, he was still at a loss as to what to do with the runes before him. Who knew what these messy words and images were pointing to? There wasn't even a direction. "This is an observation record," the Death Wizard suddenly said. "Teacher, you mean, I don't know what the object of observation is, but the writer of this notebook tried to describe it, but he was unable to do so, resulting in a terrible physical and psychological state." The Death Wizard's consciousness continued to flow, like a breeze coming from an unknown place in the cabin, seeping into the muscles and bones. "By directly touching that notebook, I can sense chaotic and restless power, despair, and stubbornness. different sources, but they've been twisted together to form an unrecognizable monster. However, it was sealed by the words and graphics on the title page. Constance and the Star Sorcerer exchanged glances, but there was no doubt. The Death Wizard was publicly recognized as the most authoritative shaman in the world. She could go back in time and foresee things. Her judgment, be it evidence or intuition, was very persuasive and had the power to guide others. Of course, Constance and the Star Sorcerer were transcendents with great confidence, so they wouldn't believe whatever the Death Wizard said. But this kind of explanation was a direction, right? Following this train of thought, the Star Sorcerer tried to think in a relatively reasonable direction. There's no order to the pages in the notebook, and there's no pattern. From a single page, it doesn't seem like a direct depiction, or at least not a mechanical copy. Otherwise, there should be a simpler method and a clearer visual impression. Constance understood what he meant. Then it's very likely an object that can't be described directly, or a target with mental pressure. Just like what many religious texts say, do not look directly at God. None of the three transcendents present believed in the so-called gods, so they naturally replaced the words with a powerful unknown existence. Perhaps this was still a fantasy, but at least this train of thought could continue. The Death Wizard took the initiative to lead the conversation. It could be a living thing, or it could be a series of more complicated and strange things. No matter what, it would be a very strenuous task to depict it with Luo Yuandao's abilities and methods at the time. He obviously couldn't use any equipment. He had to first observe and understand it, then record it in a way that allowed for practical use. He could only rely on his brain and hands. Sometimes he succeeds, and sometimes he fails. And these, as well as the scattered scribbles on the notebook, are the accumulation of the results of his failures. The Star Sorcerer's arm twitched, and the virtual workspace was destroyed. Clearly, this wasn't his own will. The Death Wizard never wasted her energy on meaningless things. Her time and energy were too precious. Recovering from the results of a failed observation is something impossible. What's left on the notebook are fragments that have been clumsily translated, lost most of the information, and reduced dimensions. And the value lies in the fact that they actually exist. Constance always found something positive. This is that lunatic Luo Yuandao, right? That's the value of his existence. The Death Wizard's thoughts became more and more erratic. At the very least, he saw a world that we couldn't see. He touched upon a level that he shouldn't have touched upon. He left behind bits and pieces. Unfortunately, they're all trash that can't be recovered. And this is probably one of the reasons why he's able to survive until now. The Star Sorcerer ran through the information regarding Luo Yuandao in his mind. So, is this the reason why he went crazy? The Death Wizard's thoughts laughed. He forcefully accommodates things that cannot be digested. He chases after treasures that he doesn't have the qualifications to possess. He doesn't know that this thing will break his stomach when it enters his digestive system. When it enters his thinking system, it will burn his brain. In a certain sense, he really has it hard. The Star Sorcerer grabbed his right wrist and loosened it a bit. That treasure is with Luonan right now? Yes, this connects to the current hot topic. Luonan? The Death Wizard muttered to herself for a moment before sneering. He will have it harder in the future, if there's a future. Chapter 1048. Anhai Mental Sanatorium was currently at its most leisurely time of the day. Ward rounds, dressing changes, diagnosis and treatment had all been carried out. The patients and elderly who had been recuperating here walked out of their rooms one after another. They took a walk outside and breathed in the fresh air. It would be even more perfect if the thick clouds in the sky could be wiped away at this time, allowing the occasional sunlight to pass through to be less stingy. Recently, Luo Yuandao's physical condition had been maintained quite well. As the weather warmed up, he had already resumed outdoor activities under the close care of the special nurse. Moreover, with Xiao Xinyu's company, his smile had become much more cheerful. Today was no exception. This kept Dr. Zhang Yuliang, Octopus, in a good mood. He had been paying attention to the situation through the monitor. He brewed a cup of coffee for himself and offered a toast to the brain cells that had been sacrificed because of last night's all-night. How about I go out for a stroll too? Just as he was thinking, the hexa-ear in his ear vibrated slightly. It projected a message through his retina. The sender of the message was the Psychic Wave Network maintenance team of the Xia City branch. Ouyang Chen signed and stamped it. It was a warning directed at the core members of the Xia City branch and the elite operations team. Currently, the abyssal region of the Psychic Wave Network corresponds to the level of the abyssal region. A continuous and irregular force has appeared. The fluctuating range is between 0.003 dg and 12.5 d. The source of the force has yet to be discovered. To ensure the safety of the branch members and the city's ability users, the interference ports of the Psychic Wave Network will be temporarily shut down. The Fortress of the Ring of Blood and Will in the abyssal region. It is recommended that before the alarm is lifted, all activities that may touch upon the abyssal region and even the depths of the spiritual sea are suspended. To all personnel who have received this notice, please immediately enter Level 1 standby mode and activate your coordinates. If you feel any physical or mental discomfort, please immediately contact the branch laboratory. What did this mean? Octopus was also psychic, but he was a bit confused when he saw this notice. He didn't understand half of it. He quickly logged into the main page and forums of the Psychic Wave Network, but he saw that it was still calm and tranquil. There was only a maintenance and temporary shutdown notice that was lightly worded and did not involve the abyssal region's movements. He rummaged through several work channels and chat groups of the Xia City branch. Probably because the core information was limited, there weren't many people in the know. No effective discussion was formed. Most of the people in the know were as confused as he was. A call came in while he was confused. It was Bamboo Pole. When the call connected, the person on the other side asked, "Are you all right?" Octopus knew that Bamboo Pole wasn't just asking about him, so he wasn't in a hurry to answer. Instead, he carefully observed the surveillance footage before saying, "Everything is normal. What's going on? I'm not sure yet. I'm at the Shangding building right now. The president is leading the investigation." The octopus asked again. The force exceeded 10 standard units. Is there an extraordinary attacking us? There's no conclusion at the moment, at least not yet, but we've basically ruled out the malfunction of the sensor equipment. That's because basically, the mental side of B class and above will show varying degrees of reaction. Bamboo Pole was also a grade B psychic, which meant that he had also felt it. Other than that, Elder Yu, Mr. Bai, and Gao Tianshi, the three psychics had the strongest reaction. Of course, there's also President Ouyang. At this point, Bamboo Pole seemed to be talking to someone. After about half a minute, he spoke again. Now, we have a preliminary estimate. It might be an unknown powerhouse, definitely at the extraordinary level. It might be a famous expert, or it might be a mutant species from the wilderness that is currently extending its consciousness into this place. The octopus subconsciously responded, "A war?" Right now, it's just tossing and turning on the mental plane, but it's always searching for an entry point to the material plane. It's tried many times, but it's not satisfied. It seems to be an obsessive-compulsive disorder. This is what the president said. The octopus chuckled twice. I wonder who it is. At the very least, President Ouyang feels that it's unfamiliar. There's no corresponding data in the database. From the looks of it, it's more likely that it's an unknown mutant species. It might even be classified as a darksider species. Like the human-faced arachnid? Don't jinx it. Bamboo Pole still had lingering fears from the chaos of Xia City back then. An extraordinary level darksider species. I didn't say it. You said it. The two habitually bickered for a bit, but Bamboo Pole quickly returned to the main topic. In short, be careful in everything. Tonight is extremely sensitive. It wouldn't be strange for anything to happen. I don't need to emphasize this. In a moment, Mr. Bai will go over there. If there's anything, you guys can discuss it. Keep in touch and report in time. In addition, President Ouyang suggests that no matter who it is, reduce outdoor activities. He feels that the cloud layer above his head is quite awkward. F*CK me? The octopus jumped in fright. He raised his head to look at the monitor screen. Luo Yuandao and Xiao Xinyu were currently slowly moving about on a soft and flat grassland. Luo Yuandao, who was practically a bag of bones, made a rare large movement. He stretched his body. During this movement, his head, which was tilted upwards, became fixed. He still had his hands on his waist, but he no longer swung his neck. Instead, he stared blankly at the thick layer of clouds in the sky. It was approximately 10:30 in the morning right now. Although there were thick clouds in the sky that blocked most of the sun's rays, it was still cloudy and not overcast. The sun's rays dazzled the edges of the cloud layer with layers of gold. A normal person would not be able to stare directly at the sky for too long before they would tear up from the stimulation of the sunlight. Looking at the sky for too long was definitely not a good thing. Luo Yuandao was even worse than a normal person. There's something going on over at the old man's side. I'll go take a look. Octopus didn't have time to say anything more to Bamboo Pole. He rushed out the door in 2 or 3 steps and ran towards the grassland. Fortunately, he had made arrangements beforehand. He had special nurse Hong, who took care of Luo Yuandao, come to the area in front of his office whenever he accompanied the old man out for a stroll. They were so close that if anything happened, she would be there in a matter of minutes. When Octopus rushed to Luo Yuandao's side, the latter was still maintaining his posture of looking straight at the sky. All right, the old man's eyes were closed. It was probably because of this situation that Xiao Xinyu, who was already by Luo Yuandao's side, frowned but did not try to dissuade him. Or perhaps he did dissuade him, but it had no effect at all. However, what did that extremely focused and serious look mean? Unexpectedly, when Octopus jogged over, Luo Yuandao suddenly said, "Zhongheng, you've come at the right time. It's been a long time since I've had such a neat and tidy impression." Octopus was stunned. He subconsciously looked at Xiao Xinyu. The latter did not say anything and only shook his head slightly. On the other side, Luo Yuandao continued, "Qingwen's train of thought is clearer than ours. I've also benefited greatly from her adjustment this time." Later on, Luo Yuandao said some unclear words, involving some unfamiliar names, professional terms, and so on. In the end, he said, "I'll do my best to use Qingwen's method to repeat it once. You remember it too? Let's first study it and see if we can piece together an outline to piece together the appearance of a deity." Chapter 1049. It seemed that he had accidentally touched upon some secrets of the past. Octopus was quite conflicted right now. If he listened, he might violate the privacy of the Luo family. If he didn't listen, this opportunity would never come again. And Luo Nan wasn't here. Having dealt with Luo Nan for a long time, Octopus obviously knew that this kid knew very little about the past of his grandfather and father, especially the past events in the wilderness. However, he was extremely thirsty. It would be hard to explain if Luo Nan were to ask about this matter in detail. As a friend, should he listen? Or shouldn't he? Octopus's conflicted thoughts wouldn't affect the outside world. However, Luo Yuandao didn't say too much after that. His eyes were still closed, but his demeanor was as if he was observing with rapt attention. In the end, he even slowly raised his arm. It was as if he wanted to grab the clouds in the sky. It was as if he wanted to welcome the dazzling sunlight behind the clouds. In the end, he wasn't able to grab anything. Instead, the excessively withered palm seemed like it would turn into smoke at any time under the sunlight that permeated through the clouds, melting into the shadows of the clouds. The old man's stiff fingers trembled uncontrollably at the front end of this arm. He was gesturing with lines that had no basic logic or concrete shape. However, perhaps in his own circle of thinking, he was doing meaningful work. So gradually, a smile actually appeared on the old man's face, and it grew more and more brilliant. Luo Nan quietly gazed at the shadow of the clouds, at the old man who was so withered that he was out of shape. The palm that was pointing at the sky seemed to be pointing at his chest. Of course, he also saw the old man smile. Though the old man's eyes were closed and he wasn't pointing at anything, this was probably the most amiable grandfather had shown him in recent years when the grandfather and grandson met face to face. Right now, Luo Nan's thoughts were entrusted to the clouds that covered the skies of Xia City. They were concentrated on the sanatorium. Xia City was the area that Luo Nan had the strongest control over. There were far too many people here that he needed to pay attention to and protect at all times. Therefore, the Mother Mica and the Soul Cloak supported each other, accumulating and replenishing each other. From last night until now, Xia City hadn't been clear. The accumulated water vapor transformed into a thick mass of clouds. They gradually piled up to form the structure of the Mother Mica, covering the entire city. Then Luo Nan's thoughts jumped and began to directly interfere with the covered area. With Luo Nan's pure sensing ability, there was no need to be this high profile. However, his current state of mind was not stable enough. Luo Nan was able to unearth many things through his contact with the original notebook. He could understand the meaning behind the symbols, words, and even the messy lines. This did not mean that he could recover the person recorded in the notebook and decipher his grandfather's thoughts. He had only truly touched the chaotic spiritual light left on the ordinary page under the suppression of the 16 words formula and the visualization diagram, as well as the remnant emotions of extreme pain. Luo Nan could confirm that his grandfather didn't possess supernatural powers. But where did the spiritual light on those pages come from? Even after more than 10 years, it still made its existence known to him. Luo Nan was no longer a greenhorn. He had gone through all sorts of experiences and studies during this period of time. He already possessed the ability to judge and deduce from small clues. He seemed to be able to see the cause and effect of all of this. In just a few minutes of reading the notes, he had already constructed a preliminary model. A powerful source of energy and information had penetrated the frail framework of an ordinary person's body and soul, leaving behind an imprint on the similarly frail page. Within the split-page notebook, the chaotic strokes of the strokes weren't just simple ink and paint. They were the scorch marks of the writer's soul burning. Luo Nan was certain that his grandfather wasn't just a simple recipient when the source of radiation penetrated. That old man was clearly recording, controlling, and expressing something. Of course, the current notebook was a collection of the results of failure. There were no achievements to be seen. There was only fragmentation and pain. But in another sense, this was the result of the source of radiation penetrating the frame of the old man's body and soul. It had the smallest deformation and the most retained results. What was the source of radiation? Where was it? How did it arrive or connect? Those fellows who could understand, or at least partially, were probably researching and considering this question. In the past, no one cared about formatting theory. When the archetype format was at its zenith, there probably weren't many people who cared about this sort of thing. These notebooks that recorded the failures and sealed errors were sealed in the depths of the laboratory, never to see the light of day. But now, the situation was completely different. Clearly, this was largely due to Luo Nan. Those fellows thought of every possible way to dig out the source of Luo Nan's power, especially the location of the new plane. Perhaps they had bound all of Luo Nan's achievements to date to the unknown resources at the core of the new plane. Needless to say, Luo Nan thought the same. The only difference was that those fellows were thinking of the new plane, while Luo Nan was thinking of the Sunwheel Hell. There was no way around it. This was his first reaction. Luo Nan had long since known what his grandfather and parents were concentrating on, observing, and researching. It was the Mist Maze. It was the mysterious existence of the Sunwheel Hell in the depths of the Mist Maze that could not be effectively explained to this day. His mother's North Coast gear had opened the door to the cloud world. That place was the product of the collision between the Mist Maze and Earth's local spacetime. His father's tree hole was formed for the purpose of observing the Mist Maze and ultimately pointed towards the Sunwheel Hell. As for his grandfather, although the scope of his research seemed to be the transformation of the frame of the human body and soul, he was without a doubt the leader of this line of research. There were most likely no problems if Luo Nan thought in this direction. Luo Nan was able to make a simple analysis. The Mist Maze, the shattered fragments of space-time, and the domain couldn't form the burden and radiation of a large amount of information without extraordinary power or special equipment to integrate and analyze them. the Sunwheel Hell was different. After all, Luo Nan had truly experienced the impact of the destructive flood of information for himself. Not just once. Was this the truth? Luo Nan didn't know. Actually, the key thing that was pressing against Luo Nan's chest, twisting his skull, and making his mind absent-minded wasn't this. What occupied most of his brain's resources was another matter. Luo Nan was suddenly enlightened because of this split-page notebook. His grandfather's so-called schizophrenia turned out to be due to another reason. It wasn't a neurological disease in the traditional sense. Instead, it was damage from external sources of radiation. New discoveries always brought new thoughts. Luo Nan thought, maybe I can do something? This thought germinated and couldn't be restrained. Therefore, Luo Nan hurriedly changed his thoughts and headed straight for Xia City. Luo Nan came with a certain amount of hope. His rich experiences and leaps and bounds of progress gave him a certain degree of confidence. After all, he was already publicly recognized as a psychic expert. He had established a profound structure of the mental domain that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. He could spread a global network, control the mind and communicate and trace back to precognition. There was also the mica structure that he had just established. He specialized in dissection and analysis. But reality gave him a beating. Reality was that he couldn't see through it. It wasn't that the old man's current frame of body and soul had some sort of powerful concealment ability that could block Luo Nan's probing senses. The core problem was complexity, chaos, and fragility. The frame structure of the old man's body and soul had already reached the point of collapse with a single touch. Luo Nan's consciousness poured here, stirring the winds and clouds, drawing the starry sky, causing wave after wave of ripples in the sea of consciousness and the polar domain of the abyssal region. But here, on the lawn of this sanatorium, faced with this fragile soul that would shatter with a single poke, Luo Nan could only step back and not move forward. He was helpless. So Luo Nan knew that even if he amassed the apex power of Earth and used the living starry sky structure that he was most proficient in, or the mica structure that he had just obtained, it would still be difficult to make a move. Making a move required the awareness of a destructive dismantling. That was a consequence that Luo Nan simply couldn't bear. Unfortunately, because of his meaningless actions just now, he was able to pry a step further into the ominous shadow that drew closer behind the old man. The aura of death. Luo Nan was no longer a child who had never seen the world. His rich experiences during this period of time could instantly kill 99% of the normal humans in this world. It wasn't that he had never seen a life state worse than Luo Yuandao's. Some of them were even created by him. But how could that be the same? Luo Nan was able to clearly distinguish in his mind that this was a kind of selfish way of thinking. His rationality had always been in play, allowing him to suppress the sudden eruption of irritability, depression, gloom, and all sorts of other negative emotions from the great ups and downs in his heart. But that was all there was to it. Luo Nan gazed at the withered and shriveled old man on the lawn. He gazed at the frail structure of body and soul that could no longer be further explored or stripped away. All sorts of thoughts and ideas rose and fell in his mind, but it was hard for him to grasp any valuable fragments for a time. The only thing that could be said to be comforting right now was the old man's observation with his eyes closed. Luo Nan knew that the old man wasn't looking at the layer of clouds. He didn't discover any structure within the layer of clouds. The layer of clouds was at most an inducement. Even the existence and tendency of Luo Nan's consciousness was a part of the inducement. The main activity of the old man's consciousness at this stage was still limited within his self-logical circle. The external world was merely the background that rotated on the stage of his consciousness. He was still within his own demarcated circle. It was just that this time, the old man was no longer an omnipotent God who could do everything. Instead, he had returned to the most profound life of the past. He continued to struggle. His trembling and deformed fingertips drew. These were the strokes that he poured his heart's blood into. He used this to communicate with his children, his students, and his colleagues. There were no obstructions. So even though the sun gradually faded from the sky and the dense clouds prevented rain, the smile on his face still grew brighter and brighter. Luo Nan gazed at this scene in a daze. His mind was in a trance. Chapter 1050. If the old man's smile and current state could be sustained for a long time, Luo Nan's mentality might be more conservative. He might place more of his thoughts in the direction of how to create a similar environment. But that was not the case. Luo Yuandao's stamina and energy were simply not enough to support such a state. After standing alone on the lawn for less than a minute, his body began to sway. Octopus and Nurse Hong rushed over to support him, which directly interfered with the old man's self-logic. He began to struggle, and his emotions began to fluctuate again, becoming irritable. Under Luo Nan's gaze, the frail structure of the old man's body and soul entered a terrible state of chaos after a short few dozen seconds of peace and harmony. In fact, he was even weaker than before. The lawn also began to become chaotic. Octopus and Nurse Hong tried to put the old man into the wheelchair. The old man continued to struggle. During this time, he opened his eyes. His turbid and hazy vision, after drifting for a few degrees, locked onto the thick clouds in the sky. Occasionally, he would flip his palms up and try his best to reach upwards. At this moment, no matter how constrained Luo Nan's thoughts were, he could still understand. The old man's self-logic formed a link with the clouds in the sky, bestowing a certain peculiar value to it. Perhaps this was the moment when the grandfather and grandson were most connected in over a decade? The problem was that this might not lead to a good result. Muffled rolls of thunder clearly rang in the sky, but Luo Nan's mind escaped during this time. Let's put it this way for the time being. He completed a great switch between Xia City and the Central Pacific Ocean. Due to the shift in focus, the water vapor fake body that had dissipated for a moment on the cruise ship solidified again. Plus, Blood Demon reacted very quickly. His body control ability was astonishing. Even though everyone knew that Luo Nan's soul had left his body a bit, the awkward situation didn't last too long. And at this time, Zhang Yingying's chain of calls helped Luo Nan out of his predicament. The signal came from Xia City, and it chased Luo Nan all the way here. Luo Yui, you've gone too far. The moment the call connected, Zhang Yingying opened her mouth and scolded, "You do whatever you want. It's fine if you don't follow the plan, but why can't you contact me at all when you're looking for someone?" Did I? Luo Nan's mind was still a bit absent-minded. Zhang Yingying's energetic voice sounded righteous. Didn't your communicator explode? Either the line is busy or you're not picking up. I can't tell that you're quite busy. Except for who else is coming to harass me? Luo Nan retorted in passing. He absorbed a bit of strength from the other side in passing, allowing his mood to calm down a bit. It was also because of Zhang Yingying's reminder that he also split off a portion of his consciousness and swept it over the North Bank's underground laboratory that was several thousand kilometers away. Luo Nan's various communication tools were perfectly placed there. They were originally meant to confuse the enemy, but right now they were just serving as a signal relay station. The only advantage was that he could log into a large local area network like the Psychic Wave Network, which had limited coverage without any problems. He could Psychic Network Soul Network, but he was Limited Range Network. Luo Soul Luo Nan. Luo Nan sighed. He gradually reduced the hybrid structure of his soul cloak and mica, interfering with the material plane of Xia City. This could be considered as tidying up the mess left behind by his sudden escape. Hopefully, President Ouyang and the others would not work overtime because of this. Aside from this, Luo Nan also saw Zhang Yingying's so-called exploding phone calls. Actually, there were only 2 or 3 of them. As for the other 2, while she was distracted, Zhang Yingying asked again, "Then, Yuan, why, have you had enough harassment, or have you been harassed enough?" Zhang Yingying asked, "Are you done harassing or being harassed? Give me a definite message. There's still 4 or 5 hours until the auction starts. Have you arranged any programs?" Programs? Luo Nan's gaze subconsciously swept across Blood Demon and Wan Liuhua's faces. He had no intention of asking. Even if there were programs, he wouldn't be interested in participating, let alone programs. I can't do this. Luo Nan's mind tightened. He quickly denied his previous state of mind. If he became distracted, lost in thought because of a notebook, then wouldn't he be exposing his weakness to others? In the end, Luo Nan had learned a few things when it came to interpersonal communication and scheming. Perhaps it was very difficult to do it perfectly. Perhaps it wasn't worth mentioning in the eyes of experts, but he still needed to improve through experience. If he improved a little, then the enemy would misjudge a little. Wouldn't that be the case? Luo Nan calmed the churning thoughts in his mind once more. He redistributed his consciousness to various spatial directions. He needed to be a bit more in front of people, especially in the jadeite light. It would be best if a situation like Blood Demon's palm smashing into his shoulder blade didn't happen again. Luo Nan's thoughts flowed. It only took a second or two for Luo Nan to laugh. I can ask about programs, but I don't have any. I do. Can't I find some fun on such a large ship? Luo Nan's laughter was abrupt. In truth, it was a bit terrifying. Zhang Yingying was stunned for a moment. She didn't respond immediately. Luo Nan temporarily stopped this topic. Your line is busy. I'll make another call. Contact me later. Luo Nan didn't do as Zhang Yingying said and immediately made a call. Instead, he turned to look at the person in the elevator who needed his attention the most. Tu Gu, the bodyguard-like extraordinary, was still lingering in the elevator. The direct reason for this was the tool that came with him. This person was possessed and controlled by the necromancer. It consumed a lot of energy. Tu Gu spent quite a bit of effort to give this colleague the strength to stand up. Luo Nan asked, "Do you want to have afternoon tea together?" Tu Ji's attitude was still restrained and polite. "It's okay. I took the liberty to disturb you. I hope you can forgive me." He didn't say anything more. He gave Luo Nan a nod and supported his tool colleague. They walked back into the elevator and left. Luo Nan only turned his attention back after the elevator closed and went up. Blood Demon slapped Luo Nan's back again at this time. This time, both the slap and the reception were done quite perfectly. This fellow Tu Gu isn't simple, right? Yes. He's very strong. He's very organized. Blood Demon was stunned for a moment. He soon laughed. Brother Luo, your comments are quite unique. Luo Nan laughed. He didn't speak in detail. He thought for a moment, found a number, and dialed back. Sister Pomegranate. He was calling his cousin, Mo Han. She was also one of the two people who had called just now. Mo Han was clearly in class. She picked up quickly and spoke in a low voice. Luo Nan could still hear the unhappiness in her tone. You're back from playing around? Don't look for me. It's Yu Qin looking for you. It looks like it's quite urgent. Luo Nan immediately understood. Yu Qin's call must have gone unanswered. She was worried that Luo Nan wasn't picking up on purpose, so she asked for Mo Han's help. Aside from being urgent, this method of doing things was excessively careful. It showed that Yu Qin held more reverence towards Luo Nan. However, there were certainly many twists and turns involved to be able to force Yu Qin to this point. Luo Nan didn't hope to understand everything in an instant. He also didn't want to waste his brain. He gave Mo Han a few vague grunts and hung up the phone. Luo Nan thought of an old acquaintance of Xia City who he had met on the same cruise ship not too long ago. That person was Yu Qin's father. What was his name again? Chapter 1051. Luo Nan wanted to immediately call Yu Qin, but he turned to glance at Blood Demon and the others. They were still waiting idly by the elevator. His mind stirred, and he nodded in that direction. My classmate is looking for me. It's probably a bit of a private matter. He paused here and said, Actually, you two don't need to keep me company. Isn't Tucker and Dr. Bai always following me? Bai Xinyan was fine, but Tucker's eyes were wide open. His words were stuck in his throat. Why am I always following you? Tucker's expression was rich, but the problem was that no one paid attention to him. Blood Demon and Wan Luhua looked at each other. We're being ignored. Okay, this is a joke. In fact, they could feel that Luo Nan's words were unclear, but they were exceptionally clear about his purpose. It seemed that this fellow wanted to do something. The kind that would look for trouble. Yes, they could see that Luo Nan was still young. Perhaps he felt that it wasn't good to lose face in the face of complicated interpersonal relationships, or perhaps he instinctively rejected the tyrannical behavior of bullying the weak. In short, the two extraordinaries, who could suppress the vast majority of variables, had become burdens. The two extraordinaries were unable to fully understand Luo Nan's mental journey for a while. However, they were all intelligent people, so they didn't need to speak too bluntly. A large part of the reason why they kept following Luo Nan was because they were worried that Luo Nan would directly clash with the extraordinaries on the Jadeite light ship. It might even escalate, adding variables to their future plans. Right now, the most troublesome few people had either directly or indirectly met face to face. The possibility of a direct conflict or a violent conflict was already very small. Luo Nan's current state had absolutely no problems with his personal safety. That's fine. I need to go take care of some things. Wan Luhua had been called over by Blood Demon at the last minute. As a high-level member of the Eye of Secret Deeds, there were quite a few matters that needed to be taken care of before entering this huge maelstrom. Wan Luhua did things in a straightforward manner. Since she had spoken, she didn't stay any longer. She entered the elevator, turned around, and smiled at Luo Nan. "Call me anytime if you need anything." Luo Nan bowed in thanks. Seeing the elevator door close, Blood Demon impatiently clicked his tongue twice. "Your luck with women is quite good. Don't look at this master style smiling all the way here. He's usually a fierce character." Luo Nan ignored these senseless words. He just asked, "What about you, Mr. Blood Demon? What are your plans?" Blood Demon, who was despised again, was still smiling happily. "Actually, I hired you to be my artist today. I didn't expect that we would get along so well, and many of the drawings went beyond the scope. Some words came out of the Blood Demon's mouth, but the meaning was the same. I originally wanted to bring you to experience a few small circles, but since you have your own ideas, I can't force you. Since I've already said it, I have to do something about it. How about this? I'll make the arrangements and see if I can find a few who don't look so repulsive. I'll call you later." Luo Nan answered in a straightforward manner. "Why isn't there any sincerity? Didn't you agree? This is a bad omen." The Blood Demon chuckled and said no more. Without using the elevator, he turned around and left with a smile on his face. In this way, only Luo Nan, Tucker, and Bai Xinyan were left in the elevator. From the beginning to the end, no one asked for their opinion. Bai Xinyan was calm and collected. In comparison, Tucker was a little impatient. Perhaps it was because he had lost two Nemesis characters in a row, but he was finally able to breathe. His courage grew when he was angry. After hesitating for a moment, Tucker finally asked the question. "What do you want me to do?" He emphasized the word, "I," and blurred out the words, "Uncle Luo," at the same time. Luo Nan didn't mind. He just laughed. "Be a bodyguard." "Since when am I a bodyguard?" "Aren't you? Then let's be clear about it." Tucker was speechless for a time. Clearly, Luo Nan wasn't going to reason with him. He could only blame Blood Demon for his terrible demonstration. Luo Nan really did have a plan for using Tucker. He had a plan on the plane, forming a basic train of thought. It was just that the details were not clear. The main thing was that Luo Nan's previous experience might not be useful. In any case, there were still a few hours left. This fellow looked like he had rough skin and thick flesh. He should be able to endure being tossed around. Luo Nan had a plan in mind, so he no longer paid attention to Tucker. He had to take care of some miscellaneous matters before doing proper business. He activated his wristband from several thousand kilometers away and contacted Yuqin. The call was answered in an instant. "Mr. Luo." They were classmates and alumni. This form of address was far too polite. It was a deformed beginning. It was hard to avoid awkwardness later on. Yuqin wanted peace of mind. Fortunately, they were gradually getting used to it. "My father asked for your number just now, Mr. Luo. I didn't tell him directly." Yuqin's words were polite, but she went straight to the point. She really wasn't in the mood to engage in small talk. "I think that he might have encountered some trouble. His mind is uneasy. Otherwise, he would have remembered that he contacted you through me at the end of last year." "Oh, Something like that happened. Luo Nen nodded. He remembered this detail as well. At the same time, he felt that the nickname Xian, or that the doll gave Yuqin, couldn't be more appropriate. She always had an intelligent and calm personality. My father is currently on the Jadeite light. He said that he saw you not too long ago. Yes, that's right. Yuqin didn't ask why Luo Nan was there. Of course, she didn't say that Mo Han still believed that Luo Nan was still in closed-door training in Xia City's laboratory. She just asked politely and carefully, "My father definitely needs help, but that place isn't like Xia City. Mr. Luo, can I give him your number?" Sure. Since Luo Nan had returned the call, he had made preparations in this regard. He agreed quite straightforwardly. Yuqin considered things a bit more. When asking for help, she needed to explain the sequence of events as clearly as possible. Only then would she not be embarrassed and even cause misunderstandings. She carefully considered her words and did her best to tell Luo Nen everything she knew. My father and my brother are together. They are here to treat the problem of an infection. Yuqin's tongue was nimble. She explained the sequence of events clearly with just a few words. Of course, there were some details that she couldn't grasp. Luo Nen didn't mind because he had already grasped the keywords. Clay's laboratory. Luo Nan's gaze turned to Bai Xinyan. She could be considered half the main character. He grinned and comforted Yuqin. I understand. You don't need to worry. I will understand the specifics of the situation from Uncle. Otherwise, you can give me Uncle's number. It's the same. Luo Nan's attitude was very polite. He didn't deliberately put on airs. Yuqin clearly let out a breath of relief. She said that she would immediately transfer Luo Nan's number to her father and let him get in touch with Luo Nan. The call ended quickly and efficiently. Luo Nan quite approved of the other side's attitude. He thought about how he would have to call in a bit, so he simply stopped in the elevator and turned his gaze to Bai Xinyan. What kind of demonic moth are you guys up to now? Bai Xinyan looked a bit surprised. You're talking about Yuqi's son, right? That young man is in Team C. He's a different kind of VIP. No matter how much the laboratory tosses and turns, it wouldn't cause trouble for its future customer. Luo Nen coughed. Start from the beginning. He looked at Bai Xinyan up and down. I found it strange just now. Yuqin's brother, his name is Yu Zheng, right? He was infected in Xia City. How did he hook up with you guys across the Pacific Ocean? Oh, the course of the disease isn't right. He was infected at the beginning of the year. It's been almost half a year. If he hasn't been cured by now, then he should be in the severe third stage. Bai Xinyan pursed her lips into a smile. This involves a few problems on the research and technical level. Can you be a bit more direct? Luo Nan's lips twitched. The water vapor body reflected his thoughts, and he subconsciously moved his fingers. His thumb and index finger unfolded one after the other. His middle finger was about to come out. It looked like it was going to be the third time soon. It was unknown whether or not Bai Xinyan understood Luo Nan's hand gestures. In any case, she did explain a bit more. Mr. Luo, perhaps you're paying more attention to the auction for this event organized on the Jadeite Light. But the essence of the event is actually an exhibition and an exchange meeting concerning the research and application of distortion technology. Or perhaps it's a trade fair for the results of distortion research in recent years. Among them, the controllable distortion technology is one of the most eye-catching ones. Luo Nan's fingers paused. Controllable distortion? That's right. It's using the dangerous external stimulation of distortion infection to find one or even several subversive human evolutionary paths. To put it simply, through this experiment, a new path can be opened between ordinary people and ability users. It's independent of the two existing paths of self-awakening and burner transformation. Bai Xinyan spoke with fervor and assurance. She spoke of everything she knew without holding back. She spoke without reserve. Admittedly, she spoke in a straightforward manner, but her contents possessed a shocking power. In the end, Luo Nan still extended his middle finger. His 3 fingers remained there, but his meaning had already changed completely. A third path. At least that's what the presentation said. It's the product of multiple technological collaborations. LCRF, Tianqi, Deep Blue, and a few private laboratories have all joined in. They've all achieved certain results. And Dr. Clay, my mentor, presides over the laboratory. He's the demonstrator of this technological achievement. The goal of doing this is to explore its value a step further. Right now is the time to expand its influence within a certain range and find even more supporters. Luo Nan raised his eyebrows. And at this moment, a communication wave activated the wristband of Gear's underground laboratory far away on the north bank. This call was within his expectations, but Luo Nan was surprised when he noticed the caller. "Hello, student Yuqin?" "Mr. Luo." Yuqin's enunciation was as clear as before, but compared to a few minutes ago, the speed of her speech was clearly faster. Her choice of words was less particular, and her final words were a bit shaky. "Mr. Luo, I can't contact my father." "Huh. There's also Yu Zheng. There's also Uncle Lu. There's also Secretary Zheng. They aren't picking up the phone." Chapter 1052. Yu Zheng sat ramrod straight. He was even more upright than he was in class. It wasn't that he wanted to sit like this, but the metal ring on his neck was constantly releasing a weak electric current that paralyzed the central nervous system. It made him unable to muster the slightest bit of strength from head to toe. He was in whatever position the others were in. He felt more like a patient with high paraplegia who was placed in a wheelchair with the other two members of Team C. He was controlled by the men in black suits behind and beside him as they walked through the long corridor and entered this unfamiliar room. Then he saw the people in groups A and B and saw that they were similarly paralyzed. He also saw the catheters extending from their bodies and the blood flowing through them. A whining sound rang in his ears. It came from the two fellow sufferers, and perhaps also from himself. The situation didn't change according to Yu Zheng's will. The guys in groups A and B before him were treated a bit better than them. At least they had sofas and carpeted floor to lie on. They could only sit in wheelchairs and lean against the wall, shoulder to shoulder. Their hands and feet trembled as they waited for misfortune to descend. Yu Zheng didn't know what was going on at all. In the beginning, he didn't know who had ordered these expressionless men in black suits to suddenly attack them, knock down old Lu, take away their communication equipment, and bring him here alone. Now that he entered the suite, he saw the floating mass of flesh that seemed to be slightly wriggling. He also saw the catheters, blood donors, and equipment. He also saw the middle-aged white man who was half lying on the bed and receiving a blood transfusion. He had an answer to the previous series of questions, but he still didn't know where this guy came from. It was an extremely terrible situation. There was a serious information imbalance. Yu Zheng's thoughts could only move towards endless imagination. In the past few minutes, he had considered at least a dozen possibilities that could be used as suspense or horror. But in the end, everything turned into a meaningless, turbid current of emotions. They wantonly squeezed his heart, stirred his brain, and turned his entire body into a continuously heated pressure cooker. His eyeballs were almost squeezed out of their sockets. Yu Zheng struggled with all his might, but the electric ring on his neck just happened to control him. It reduced his efforts time and time again, intensifying his despair. Finally, after a powerful wave of emotions overflowed, Yu Zheng's state inevitably fell into a trough. His mind was in a trance, and his expression was blank. He looked at the black suits and some medical staff bustling around the room, adjusting the catheters and adjusting the instruments. He did not know how to react. Finally, there was only one thought in his mind. How did he end up in this situation? He vaguely remembered that just 10 minutes ago, as a human experimental subject who could be lying on the operating table at any time, he was a little nervous about facing the unknown, but he was not as anxious as his father. In fact, he was even a little eager. Thinking further, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was full of ambition. In his opinion, being a lab rat was nothing. All he needed was the ability to bite open the cage. That's what he said, that's what he really thought. But in the current situation, was there something wrong? The script of his life shouldn't be like this. When did I go astray? Yu Zheng's mental state was no longer able to support continuous thought. Very quickly, a few beautiful faces of the opposite sex that he had an intimate relationship with and had participated in many sports with flashed through his mind. It was during that event that he became a mutated infected person. No, that's not right. Yu Zheng's thoughts flickered once more, and the face of a beautiful woman appeared faintly in his mind. She seemed to be called, what was her name again? He really couldn't remember, but the appearance of another male youth that appeared soon after became exceptionally deep and clear. Luonan. Right, it was because of that beautiful woman that he and Luonan became enemies. Things became awkward from then on. Even though he was infected later on, it was to a large extent because he entered the circle of unfriendly people with Luonan. During this period, more and more information about Luonan came to his family. Though Yu Qin and his father intentionally hid it from him, did they really think he was stupid? Even if he was really stupid, a few things were strung together after he came into contact with Clay's laboratory. Yu Zheng had to admit that he was very irritated when he heard the name Luonan. He really hated it, but there were a few other elements that were closer to the category of envy, jealousy, and hatred. Yu Qin often bragged to his father behind his back about how amazing this kid was and what abilities he possessed. Later on, he came into contact with Clay's laboratory and heard about the corresponding group. But basically, most of it was just hearsay. At the very least, Yu Zheng didn't feel it too much. After all, he had only fought with Luonan once in a virtual game. What he saw and heard afterward were all about Luonan's powerful connections and his inexplicable high social status. Through his deliberate understanding and partial imagination, the relevant concepts could only be manifested in a way that he could understand. Look, that kid who hasn't even shed his fetal hair has a so-called supernatural ability. Beauties immediately fall in love with him. He can call the wind and summon the rain, and he can act unscrupulously. If only I could do this. This was the greatest driving force that pushed Yu Zheng to participate in this experiment. But how did things turn out like this today? If Luonan can do it, why can't I do it? How did he do it? What should I do? His chaotic thoughts set off a turbulent flow of emotions once again. Under the effect of the large amounts of hormones secreted by the human body, Yu Zheng's heartbeat grew faster and faster. He unconsciously began to take large breaths, and his vision grew blurry. It was as if that petite and tender youth was standing in front of him. He just stood there without any expression, but that spot clearly sparkled with light. On the other hand, Yu Zheng's side was a sheet of darkness. The boundary between light and darkness wasn't clear. It was as if he could touch it just by extending his hand and stretching his neck. Yu Zheng subconsciously wanted to do this. He believed that he had done it because there was a change in his body, but in reality, someone had pinched his chin and moved it back and forth a few times. Yu Zheng did his best to open his eyes wide, but his severely limited control over his body made it so that he could only see the black suit in front of him. He couldn't even see the person's face clearly. Instructor Wang? The state of C2 is unstable. Is that so? Then, let's put it aside for now. A knock came from the door before Instructor Wang could answer. The room was quiet, and Yu Zheng's thoughts began to return to normal. Perhaps he was stimulated by the words "put it aside for now." He subconsciously received and analyzed the information from the outside world, and he heard Instructor Wang say, "Please come in." The voice wasn't loud, but it felt like it couldn't leave the bedroom. But the door to the outer room opened in the next moment. Someone walked in after the sound of messy footsteps. Instructor Wang called out to them. "Mr. Tuesday," another voice came from behind Instructor Wang. It was probably the main character on the bed. His tone was quite polite. "Mr. Tu, you've worked hard to make a trip here." "Yes, I saw that this colleague's condition isn't too good. Send him back." This matter was clearly not important. Mr. Tu spoke a few sentences and changed the topic, but this one, is he about to awaken? Another person answered, C2 was infected on New Year's Eve last year. It's a body fluid infection, and the infection duration is the longest. The laboratory has always been under good control, but since it's Group C, it might not be as stable as Group A and Group B. HM, awaken? Instructor Wang's voice sounded again. 3 transformations, or awakening? Are they talking about me? Awakening? Yu Zheng listened, not really understanding. But the rapid heartbeat and the burning sensation of his body slowly faded. The phantom of Luo Nan was no longer in front of him. Next, he went through a messy round of tests and judgments. It wasn't easy for him to slow down, but he heard Mr. Tu's slightly raised tone. Stopped? Just as he finished speaking, there was another knock on the door. Chapter 1053. At the door of the suite, Tucker's calves were twitching as he looked at the still closed door. The thick wooden door could not block out the two cold and tyrannical auras in the room. He could be considered a strong person in the physical body, but there was still a qualitative difference between him and the two in the room. After all, that was an extraordinary. Tucker's brain was quite useful, but he could not understand it all. How did Luo Nan find this place? Was he really helping a classmate? Please, this reason? Tucker was speechless. On the other side, Bai Xinyan looked calm. Perhaps it was because she had been in charge of contacting the relevant parties and trying to communicate with them first, so she had no time to be nervous? T. Tucker would rather take over her task. After all, it was destined to be useless. Moreover, he could take the opportunity to spread some news. It was not that Tucker did not have such an opportunity on his way here, but he did not have the guts to do so. Luo Nan, who had been flipping through the notebook all along the way, inexplicably gave him an enormous pressure. It was as if there was an incorporeal demonic eye that could see through his internal organs, his mind, and his thoughts. Perhaps Luo Nan was even devising a plan to kill him? Even if it was a misconception, Tucker didn't have the guts to test it with his own life. He had been letting his imagination run wild for quite a while. It had been at least 10 seconds since he had knocked on the door, but there was no response from the other side. This was normal. He could sense the situation behind the door, so naturally, the other side would not ignore the abnormalities outside. Maintaining silence was already a kind of attitude. Tucker hoped that things would end here. He hoped that everyone would have a tacit understanding to give each other some face and never cross the door in front of him. The problem was that the development of the situation was destined to not go as he wished. Luo Nan flipped to the last page of the notebook in his hands once more. Then he closed the notebook and let out a light breath. He spoke very calmly, maybe he didn't hear it. Knock again. Tucker felt his scalp tingle as he listened. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but his arm was completely out of his control. He obediently reached out and pressed the doorbell. There was still no response from the other side of the door. It was also at this time that Tucker saw Luo Nan reach out his hand to the side. Of course, Luo Nan wasn't knocking on the door. Instead, he made a casual grabbing motion. A cloud of mist seemed to splash into the air. A pitch-black suitcase was pulled out from the mist by Luo Nan. Give me a hand. Tucker's brain still wasn't working. He just followed Luo Nan's instructions. He stupidly reached out his hand and used it as a platform, allowing Luo Nan to place the suitcase in his hand. The chest was opened by Luo Nan. Tucker did not know what was inside, nor did he dare to look in detail. She just watched as Luo Nan placed the notebook inside and took out a pen-like object from the center. There was also a square-cut piece of cloth and the like. Soon, the box was closed. In the very next second, Tucker's palm was moist, almost as though a stream of water was running through his palm. It was incredibly refreshing, and most importantly, the box sank right into his palm, vanishing without a trace. Magic? Spells? Tucker was a knowledgeable person, so he wouldn't make a big fuss over nothing. But the problem was that he could clearly feel that from the beginning to the end, the vital energy in his body was smooth and without any ripples, and it didn't cause any disturbance. Moreover, this wasn't under his control. It was Luo Nan. It was this young man before his eyes. Luo Nan had groomed him in a refreshing manner. There was no need for Luo Nan to use his spells. Tucker's palm was damp. There was no doubt that he was a tool through and through in Luo Nan's hands. As for how Luo Nan did it, Tucker no longer had the courage to think deeply about it. Open the door. Luo Nan's command had completely replaced Tucker's thoughts. He simply didn't think too much about it. He just opened the locked door without much effort. Luo Nan didn't pass on this responsibility. He walked straight in. Taker's mind was still in a blank state as he followed behind Luo Nan. Bai Xinyan was at the very back. Just as they entered the door, a series of metallic mechanical sounds rang out in front of them. All the men in black suits in the living room had pulled out their guns. They aimed uniformly at Taker. They were clearly in a state of waiting to fire. There was even a person in the middle who yelled loudly, "This is a private room. Get out immediately!" Taker's mind finally cleared up a bit under the focus of the lethal weapons. But he didn't care about these words. The matter was clear. Given the nature of these people, if a different group of people were to come in this way, no, they might not even be able to come in before they would be turned into a beehive by the bullets that shot through the door. It was precisely because of these words that the other party knew of the special nature of this place. Knowing is fear, and fear is understanding. It's true that everyone here is a tool. The group of men in black suits had sunglasses covering their faces, but it couldn't hide the beads of sweat that slid down their foreheads. Their heavy breathing exposed their unease and fear early on. Luo Nan didn't pay attention to this. It was as if he didn't see the pitch-black muzzles in front of him. He looked around very naturally. "Mr. Black Lion was here just now, right? He returned the notebook that my family had left outside to its rightful owner. That's why he came to express his thanks. This lousy reason." No one answered him. Luo Nan's gaze quickly locked onto the man in the worst condition among the group of men in black suits. It was Tool Number 1, who had returned from the mission of returning the notebook. Luo Nan nodded and answered his own question. "It looks like this is the right place." Luo Nan didn't stop as he spoke. He walked straight into the bedroom. This was too much. The men in black suits, who had gone through strict training, instinctively wanted to pull the trigger. But a concise command came from inside at this time. "Withdraw." It was as if the men in black suits had been pardoned. They withdrew their guns one after another, but they still blocked Luo Nan's path forward. The problem was, what was the point of that? Luo Nan had made up his mind long ago. He completely ignored the obstacles in front of him. Actually, this couldn't be considered an obstacle for his water vapor body. His footsteps didn't stop. He went straight forward and made contact with the wall of men in black suits in the blink of an eye. The latter didn't have any effect in blocking Luo Nan. Luo Nan's water vapor body was illusory. It was as if it came from another world. The two sides didn't intersect. It just passed right through. "Halt!" The man who had just given the order spoke once more. What was faster than his voice was the air that suddenly solidified like an iron wall. At this moment, the flow of air in the living room of the suite seemed to have completely frozen. Everyone's breath didn't even pass through their noses and mouths. Even Taker, who had a fleshly body, felt his skin tighten. The breath of his entire body suddenly turned muddy, and the flow of his blood and energy wasn't smooth. He subconsciously took a step back and took a defensive stance. He nearly bumped into Bai Xinyan. When he looked forward again, he saw the two men in black suits blocking the bedroom door. They were like a door that had been forcefully opened. An indescribably strange sound separated them. Their bodies were stiff, and they lost all consciousness. Luo Nan, who had just passed through with his illusory water vapor body, appeared in a position near the back of the center of the door. His fake body was clearly sluggish, and there seemed to be faint wisps of water vapor emitting from it. In the next moment, his entire body distorted and collapsed. Behind him was a young man dressed like a bodyguard in a black suit, but his skin was a bit strange and gray. "Instructor Wang Yong." Taker called out instinctively, but Wang Yong ignored him. Instead, he turned his head. At the same time, Luo Nan's calm voice came from inside the bedroom. "As expected, Mr. Tu is also here. Actually, I forgot to say something just now. You don't mind taking up a bit of your time, right? Oh, this scene is truly extravagant." Chapter 1054. The situation before him made Taker want to die. No, he absolutely didn't want to die. But in the current situation, there was a high probability that he would be killed here as a fish in the pond. Tucker knew who Wang Yong was. He was an extraordinaire who had been nurtured by a certain someone with all their might. He seemed to be the only one under the name of the LCRF. This person was very young, probably in his early 30s. Even if he was repeatedly questioned because of his independence and personal ownership, an extraordinary was an extraordinary. It was not Tucker's place to comment. If he really got angry, he wouldn't be able to do anything to the person in question. If he wanted to vent his anger on someone else, whoever stood in front of him would be the unlucky one. Wang Yong's skin color was already strange, and now it was even uglier. Tucker wanted to hide his body, but even though there were many muscular men in the suite, his body was the most conspicuous one. The thoughts in his mind could only be considered as wishful thinking. Fortunately, when Instructor Wang Yong saw that his line of defense had been broken through for no reason, he was stunned for a moment. Without even looking at Tucker and Bai Xinyan, he quickly turned around and rushed into the bedroom. In any case, the two of them wouldn't make any further moves. Indeed, Tucker and Bai Xinyan were very well behaved. They stood where they were and exchanged glances with the black suits in the room, showing their respect to each other. At this time, Luo Nan's line of sight had just finished cruising through the blood donors, the catheter network, the blood transfusion receptors, the relevant hubs, and the refining apparatus that filled the bedroom. In the end, he turned to 2G's face and said, 2 or 3 extraordinaries circling around. Meaningless consumption and waste. This must be the legendary money ability. Luo Nan could see, at least from the perspective of others, that the situation in this bedroom was just a topic of conversation between Luo Nan and others. However, Tu Gu was not very cooperative. He maintained a calm attitude and remained silent. Luo Nan opened his mouth, and the rest was very calm. He raised the brush and cloth in his hand and waved them in front of 2G's eyes. Earlier, I promised Mr. Blood Demon that I would draw a batch of portraits of extraordinaries for his magazine. Of course, the other techniques are too time-consuming. I'm prepared to give him a sketch. I hope he can accept it. I've tentatively decided on 13, but the problem is that the total number of extraordinaries I've seen might not be that many. It must be a lie. Tucker could not help but curl his lips when Ronan's voice reached the living room. Why is it that almost all of the news I've heard about you is about opposing extraordinaries? The other people in the room weren't interested in tangling with these details. Wang Yong, who entered the room after Luo Nan, fixed his gaze on the object in Luo Nan's hand. If Luo Nan relied purely on the semi-incorporeal quality of his water vapor body to pass through the living room's defense line, Wang Yong would have accepted it. But there was a problem. Luo Nan was holding a real object in his hand, so the penetration just now was completely unreasonable. To be more precise, it was beyond common sense. Wang Yong thought of a possibility. A spatial fault? Distortion? A space-time domain technique? That was what he thought and asked. "Excuse me." Luo Nan turned around to look at him. He greeted him with a smile. "This is Instructor Wang Yong? This is the first time we've met. Sorry for being presumptuous just now. Let me ask, are you interested in participating?" Seeing that the bedroom was about to descend into an even more awkward atmosphere, Old Els, who was still half sitting and half lying on the bed, coughed softly twice. He was very restrained, but it was enough for the people involved to understand what he meant. Wang Yong's face was cold as he gestured with his hand. "Mr. Luo Nan, there's a patient here. If there's nothing else, please leave." "Does that mean you agree?" At Luo Nan's age, once he began to pester endlessly, his temperament really did match. Tu Gu and Wang Yong weren't people who were good at talking. Their skill at feigning civility and sincerity wasn't maxed out. Normally, it would have been fine. The power of extraordinaries could crush most obstacles. But they just had to encounter Luo Nan right now. And the situation was super complicated. The leaders of both sides of the conflict didn't have any intentions of directly talking to each other. It was impossible to guess Luo Nan's thoughts for now. But Old Els was clearly angry. Someone had directly barged into the bedroom and was deliberately ignored. Anyone would be angry in such a situation. For Old Els to be able to maintain his composure was already first-rate shrewdness. Half a second passed before Wang Yong replied stiffly, "This can be discussed later. Right now he's being treated." Treated who? Blood transfusions or blood donors? Luonan looked around once more at this exceptionally narrow bedroom that could already fit over 10 people. 9 blood donors and backup, and 1 recipient. In his eyes, there were no secrets to speak of. If it's blood donors, then although these people can't walk properly, their central nervous systems have been disturbed by external instruments. They'll be fine once they've been dismantled. If it's said that they've been infected by a mutation, then they're all in the second stage right now. Even if their states are unstable, they can still be saved after a bit of tossing and turning. As for this, Luo Nan's gaze stopped on Wang Yong's face. He used his thumb to poke to the side, making it clear what he was referring to. His problem doesn't lie in his seemingly pure clone body. It doesn't lie in the mechanical backup of his soul information. Instead, it lies in his utterly terrible initial structural design. He hasn't sat properly since he was in the womb. Yes, whether or not he was born alive is still unknown. What's the point of tossing and turning? Luo Nan's words were thrown in Wang Yong's face. Wang Yong subconsciously swept a glance to the side of the bed, then he quickly shifted his gaze to stare at Luo Nan. "Mr. Luo, the patient is in front of you. Please be careful with your words." Patient? This isn't a treatment. It's a life extension. That's not right either. Luo Nan endlessly defined and changed his words. At the same time, he let the special paintbrush spin between his fingers. It was the standard frivolous behavior of a youth, but anyone who had a deeper understanding of him could see that there was an element of malice within. In my opinion, this isn't a treatment. It isn't a life extension either. It's more like an investment. And it's not an investment in industry. It's a venture investment. There are some areas where investments are necessary, but self-righteous investments that waste resources can only be called extravagant and wasteful. Stopping losses early is the most appropriate thing to do. Of course, I'm not familiar with this line of work. I'm just borrowing it to make an analogy. Old Els coughed once more on the bed. This time, he simply cleared his throat and then spoke. "I'm familiar with the field of venture investment. Perhaps we can help each other out." No matter who looked at it, this was Old Els taking the initiative to release an act of goodwill. It was for the sake of breaking the deadlock of mutual disregard and entering a normal mode of communication. But this required Luo Nan's cooperation. Luo Nan really did stop spinning the paintbrush. He used 3 fingers to pinch the bottom of the paintbrush, exposing the jade white brush shaft to everyone's line of sight. This included Luo Nan himself. He stared very intently at the paintbrush. He was talking about another matter. Lifespan is probably the most conspicuous indicator of a leap in the hierarchy of life. It is probably one of the most popular directions. Someone once said to me, "Laying down laws is like a pass. Piling up corpses is like a mountain. In order to surpass the limits and obtain the tinder, sacrifices are inevitable." But if we just sit on a mountain of flesh and corpses and watch others sacrifice themselves, then we casually toss out a few melons and dates and call it venture investment, then there's no meaning to it. There's an ancient saying, "One man holds the pass against 10,000 enemies." I don't want to give the authority to open up the limits of the human race to the hands of this person. Mr. Tugu, what do you think? Chapter 1055. Tu Ji's face was expressionless. His sunglasses covered his eyes, and he did not open his mouth to speak. This caused the atmosphere in the bedroom to fall into an extremely awkward state. On the bed, Old Al's eyelids drooped down. His face was as heavy as water. He did not look at Luo Nan again, but Luo Nan's image had already been outlined in his mind. It was just that it was not clear. This was because he still did not understand what Luo Nan's goal was in charging into this place. Taking the initiative to attack in a disadvantageous situation, to advance as a retreat? This was very logical. Old matters. Resentment and revenge? It could be related to this. Or perhaps it was purely out of righteous indignation. Though this was laughable, it was not impossible at this age. Though he was lying on the bed, he still received some relevant information. If there was enough time and the atmosphere was suitable, Old Els was confident that he could unravel the cocoon. Unfortunately, this young man was close at hand right now, and his actions showed off his abilities. It was not that Old Els had never experienced this sort of thing in his rich life. Of course, he knew that the most reasonable method right now was to take a step back. At the very least, there was no need for Li Wei, Wang Yu, Abner, and the others to bear the brunt of this. And indeed, he had done so. The problem was that the young man was pressing him step by step. Therefore, this was not an exchange or negotiation at all. It was a warning of death with a gun barrel pressed against his forehead. This young man really had the intent to kill stirred. Right now, he was more and more convinced that Luo Nen really was acting out of that laughable righteous indignation. Old Al's eyelids lifted up slightly, and he quickly glanced at Wang Yong beside him. This was the assurance of consulting a professional. Wang Yong muttered to himself for a moment before nodding. Old Al's understood. His eyelids closed once more, and he let out a long sigh. "I'm tired." This was tantamount to giving an order. Wang Yong responded by extending his hand towards Luo Nen once more. He gestured outwards, but Luo Nen nodded before Wang Yong could speak. "Everyone's tired." It must be said that this was the first time Luo Nen responded to El's words since he entered the room. His true intentions were revealed. Everyone should go wherever they need to go. What's the point of staying here and wasting resources? Tucker, come over and move people. Also, can you help out here? As the voice traveled outside, Tucker felt a chill from his scalp all the way down to his entire head, chest, spine, and legs. However, there seemed to be an invisible rope in the air that was holding his neck and even hooked onto his shoulder blades and tendons all over his body. Like a puppet being controlled, it pulled him forward. At this time, Old Els finally laughed out loud. When he saw that Luo Nan was about to sweep the room clean of blood donors, he felt that his boots had finally landed on the ground. His heart actually felt a bit carefree. "Mr. Luo Nan, these are specially arranged treatment equipment. It's best to listen to the opinions of professionals before dismantling and installing them, okay? Professional? Are you as good as me?" For a moment, the people in the room were speechless. It was not easy for him to connect the sharp young face in front of him with the concept of an expert. Yes, isn't he a professional? In the past, Luo Nan was fully deserving of being a master of the mental side theory of the inner world. Not to mention the live broadcast that shook the entire world on the beach of T-City. Luo Nan had clearly established a domain of authority in the field of life configuration. Perhaps every major laboratory and scientific research organization in the world was still engaged in intense debates over Luo Nan's demonstration of segmentation, superconfiguration theory, and demonstration. However, anyone who wanted to question him would have to step over the sand monster that was created out of thin air and give a sufficiently incisive and fatal explanation. Perhaps there would be such a thing in the future, but right now, Wang Yong could only forcefully block them with his stiff arm. "Mr. Luo Nan, please leave immediately." "I'm going to leave, but how?" Luo Nan revealed a smile towards Wang Yong. Wang Yong's heart suddenly became alarmed. He completely relied on his instinctive reactions to mobilize the blood energy of his entire body. He instantly broke through the limits of the material body, shook the atmosphere, and rushed back to the abyssal region from the material plane. In the blink of an eye, the flow of air in the entire bedroom, and even the wider area, was completely under Wang Yong's control. A muffled howl rang out in the room, but it was soon cut off. Only the frequency of the high-speed vibrations of the air could be heard. It faintly resonated with the distant turbulence of the abyssal region. It lashed at people's bodies and minds, bringing about a suffocating pressure. Under the effects of the power of an extraordinary, the abyssal region and the material plane were truly separated by a paper-thin barrier. The mental side could borrow the power of the abyssal region to attack the material plane, while the fleshly side could exert reverse interference, destruction, and even deep utilization. This sort of unyielding and skillful mutual interference and mutual achievement was something that the fleshly side and below could not hope to achieve. The confrontation between the fleshly side and the mental side, especially at the level of extraordinary, required that the power not be released lightly. If it was released, it would hit. It was necessary to actively disrupt and destroy the power transmission model and route of the mental side. Of course, nothing could be better than to directly destroy the frame of the enemy's body and soul and deliver a fatal strike. Wang Yong knew very well that Luo Nan's real body was not present in this situation. What was presented was merely a kiting thought, a long-range projection of soul strength. Luo Nan should not even dream of a fatal strike. However, this kiting projectile technique might appear to be extremely ingenious in its application, but it was destined to not possess high-intensity and long-term combat capabilities. Luo Nan was taking it for granted if he wanted to shake the area overseen by two extraordinaries. Wang Yong was confident that he could destroy Tu Gu in an instant in a direct confrontation. Not to mention that his and Tu Ji's abilities came from the same source. They could mutually complement each other, realizing the effect of 1 + 1 is far greater than 2. What Wang Yong paid the most attention to right now was still Luo Nan's mysterious and unfathomable space-time domain technique. No matter what level one was at, this was one of the most headache-inducing extraordinary abilities. This was because it deviated far too much from common sense. It was very easy to create unpredictable variables. Wang Yong immediately made his move. 80% of his mental strength was used to perceive the surrounding environment, and he exerted his strength to form a powerful interference against this area. This was all for the sake of quickly capturing traces of Luo Nan's operation in the relevant domain, locking onto the source, and destroying the critical power structure in one fell swoop. He needed to end this battle quickly. Old Al's state could not withstand being tossed about. For some reason, Blood Demon and Wan Luhua did not follow along. They could appear at any time. He needed to take advantage of the fact that the two extraordinaries on his side occupied an absolute advantage in terms of hard power. He needed to use the peerless defense of Tu Gu to back him up. He needed to eliminate the danger in one fell swoop while it was still in its budding state. As for how to deal with the aftermath, there were naturally more professional people who would worry about it. Wang Yong was a meticulous person, and because of his professional habits, he thought very far and very comprehensively. His judgment was indeed quite on the level. His powerful energy of blood and energy imprisoned the air and charged against the abyss, forcefully choking the flood dragon like turbulence. He seized the opportunity to subdue it for his own use. Luo Nan, who was at an absolute disadvantage in strength, had his water vapor body warp and blur. The stimulation, control, and conduction of his soul strength were not that clear. However, Wang Yong was still able to capture the strands and strands that flowed in secret. They were like cow tendons and bowstrings. They hummed and trembled in the most chaotic corner. They shuttled back and forth within the incomprehensible folds of space. They each had their own direction, but they also intertwined and weaved. It was as if they wanted to turn this limited space in the bedroom into a magic cloak that could be easily manipulated. This was already the limit of what Wang Yong could sense. Some of it was even a figment of his imagination that relied on theory and experience. He was even more unclear on the details and purpose of Luo Nan's wave of movements. But this was already enough to help him capture the relatively clear range of effect of the power. He immediately mobilized his most advantageous power to forcefully break through. This series of senses, adjustments, and force exertion were rich and complex in detail. But when restored to the range that the vast majority of people could see, it was nothing more than Wang Yong taking a step and swinging his arm. There weren't even any clear movements of a punch. The entire bedroom, including the living room outside, suddenly sunk into a stifling silence. What followed was the frantic wringing of blood under the effect of the difference in internal and external pressure. Practically everyone's blood and energy instantly surged to the top of their heads in this simple movement. This had nothing to do with emotions. It was completely the power of an extraordinaire. It dominated the direction and flow of everything within the relevant range. Aside from Tu Gu, the only one who enjoyed immunity was Old Els. He maintained his original posture as he watched Luo Nan's body, which he could not see any abnormalities before, suddenly warp and turn incorporeal. It was like the gurgling smoke of a humidifier. Soon, it disappeared without a trace. As for the blood donors in the room, as well as the bodyguards and personal staff who were caught in the crossfire, each and every one of their faces were flushed red. Some of them were even on the verge of collapsing. They were on the verge of fainting. Old Els frowned as he sighed in admiration at this supernatural power. He did not know whether or not this sort of attack would negatively affect the blood donors. Frankly speaking, he did not know whether or not it would negatively affect his own treatment. He hesitated for a moment, but he still chose to believe in the professionals. He did not say anything to interfere. He just narrowed his eyes and attentively sensed the changes within this body. If everything was normal. Old Els suddenly felt his heartbeat speed up, and it was completely irregular. It was like the problem of atrial fibrillation that had accompanied his body for dozens of years. He was not unfamiliar with this phenomenon, yet it came without reason. Old Els suddenly opened his eyes. And at this time, the various instruments that had been connected to his body all this time had already issued an alarm. Old Els felt that he should be a bit calmer, but the increasingly intense fluctuations of his heartbeat made him call out in a low voice. Wang Yong. The first to react was not Wang Yong. It was Tu Gu, who had been standing at the end of the bed all this time as the last line of defense. His reaction was very strange. He suddenly turned his head amidst Old Els' cry. His line of sight was directed at the deformed sarcoma that was suspended in midair. It was connected to many conduits. This was the core transformation center provided by the Black Lion. It was the key to treating Old Els' illness. Over here. Tu Ji's reminder was directed at Wang Yong, but Wang Yong himself had moved a bit earlier. He directly extended his hand to grab the sarcoma. Old Els was a bit baffled. He was actually able to follow this series of changes in movement. He was even able to see that before Tu Ji's palm touched the sarcoma, the ugly little thing had already begun to throb on its own. It was like a heart that was exposed to the outside, or perhaps it was the only organ of an invisible fiendish demon that could be captured by the human eye. This was all Old Els could see. After his violently trembling heart broke through a certain threshold, it instantly destroyed his observation ability and crushed his rationality and will. He pinched his chest hard, wanting to speak, but he could no longer spit out a word. He could only vaguely hear Wang Yong's angry shout. Chapter 1056. The sudden collapse of Old Els' heart rate also destroyed the offensive and defensive design and tacit understanding that Wang Yong and Tu Gu had formed. Wang Yong was actually at a loss for a time as Old Els twitched and struggled for his life on the bed. Where was Luo Nan? What kind of method would he use? How did he do it? At this moment, Wang Yong's surging qi and blood covered every inch of the bedroom and formed a highly compatible resonance with the turbulence in the abyss area. According to common sense, there was no creature that could stir up trouble in this kind of environment. Even if it was a darksider life form of legend, as long as it approached the material plane, it would similarly leave behind traces in this kind of powerful force field. Wang Yong could accept Luo Nan escaping into the depths of space, entering the depths of the abyss region, or even ascending the polar domain when Luo Nan saw that the situation was far from good. He could use his usual logic to explain it. But now, what was going on with the bright red sarcoma that was pulsating freely in the air and seemed to possess an incredible life rhythm? The tentacles, that were originally delivering the transformation fluid to Old Els, were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws in the air. What's going on? Seeing this, Wang Yongda had to make a temporary conclusion. He didn't know when, but the core of Luo Nan's power, which he had been sensing and capturing all this time, had already shifted to this ugly red sarcoma. In other words, Luo Nan had obtained control over the sarcoma. He had precisely grasped the most core link of the entire treatment system, directly threatening Old Els' life. Even if it was just a clone, it wouldn't be easy for someone to steal their base, but it was still under their control. Tu Ji's reaction was already considered fast, but as Old Els struggled on the bed, He had to stop his palm that was already reaching for the tumor. Tugu was very clear, and so was Wang Yong. If this clone died here, with old L's terrible condition, he really did not know if he would have another chance to calmly move. What was the Black Lion doing if such a deadly piece of equipment was casually stolen by others? What were the two of them doing at the scene? Tugu was still all right, as he was always calm and collected. As for Wang Yong, his originally ugly complexion was now covered with a layer of oily sheen, as if venom could come out at any time. The other people in the room had suffered from the blood vitality impact just now and were purely a burden. Wang Yong subconsciously wanted to go to the bedside to deal with old L's terrible state. At this moment, a word popped out of 2G's mouth. Change. As the voice entered his ears, a sudden burst of gunfire came from outside the bedroom. The incident in the bedroom also caused chaos in the outside room. Wang Yong's eyelids twitched, but he didn't hesitate, nor was he distracted by the chaos outside. His center of gravity, which had shifted a little earlier, shifted again as his muscles contracted. He did not pay attention to old L's, whose hands and feet were twitching on the bed. Instead, he forcefully made the nearly ebb interference field surge once more. This time, it was not to capture the elusive Luonan. Instead, it was to crush the blood donors who had formed a circle around the bed. A life for a life. At the very least, he had to put on this posture. At the same time, 2G's hand, which had paused just now, once again reached out, grabbing at the bright red sarcoma that was right in front of him. Wang Yong had been the one to deal with Luonan just now, and Tugu had been the backup. Now they had to switch roles. This was because Luonan had cut into Wang Yong's blind spot of observation and thought. He had successfully infiltrated into 2G's range of control. Actually, Wang Yong still had doubts in his mind right now. Was Luonan's soul strength projection really inside that tumor? There were no changes in his visual space, but his sensory space was a mess. Luonan had already completely excluded Wang Yong from the main battlefield within the span of a few breaths under this chaotic mental judgment. Therefore, a switch was necessary. If Wang Yong didn't want to be a bystander at this critical moment, then he needed to display the deterrent power of an extraordinary, even if his actions were more despicable. Under the radiation of the power of 3 extraordinaries, all the other living beings within the entire suite were so weak that they weren't even worth mentioning. Therefore, this sort of switch in focus and direction was completely a gamble on the value of the target in each person's heart. Did Luonan really have a bit of weak humanity left in him, just like in the legends? Could Wang Yong and Tugu replace old L's in making such a fatal decision? In any case, not a single side had any intention of pulling back in this relatively cramped space at this moment. There was even a bomb that smashed in forcefully. Amidst the muffled explosion, Yu Zheng and the other blood donors who had yet to complete their intubation were suddenly blasted apart into an enormous hole in the wall. The door connecting the living room and the bedroom in this suite was relatively narrow and conservative. It paid more attention to privacy, so the bodyguards outside could easily surround the door. However, there were still some problems with the room structure of the cruise ship when faced with inhuman power. The partition was assembled from light steel keel plasterboard. It looked like a complete piece, but in reality, there was a relatively large gap between the keel steel inside the plasterboard. The fellow who had smashed and had leaped out from the gap between the metal frames, perfectly avoiding the blood donors who didn't have any defensive capabilities. He had met Wang Yong's fist with equal precision. Tucker. Wang Yong recognized this logistics tycoon from the Central Pacific Ocean. He knew that Tucker was the adopted son of Bai Hao, the flesh and blood of Master Dem. In a certain sense, it would be more appropriate to describe them as allies. But it was this fellow who had broken through the wall, charging straight at Wang Yong's fist. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, Wang Yong saw the fellow's face. His face, which could be described as tyrannical and mighty, was now brimming with fear that completely contradicted his actions. It was to the extent that his entire facial structure was distorted. The tattoo on his cheek was infused with despair, as if it had transformed into an ominous demon snake that was slithering on his face. Wang Yong frowned and subconsciously slowed down his hand. The momentum of Taker's charge was astonishing, but it wasn't a threat to an extraordinary. He didn't want to offend two important figures of the same camp because of this kind of man-made accident. Just as Wang Yong's fist changed from hard to soft, a dazzling light suddenly exploded from the corner of his eye. As for the power behind the piercing light wave and the impact it formed on the interference force field that he was leading, that was a problem for the next wave. No one could contend with the speed of light. Therefore, Wang Yong could only watch helplessly as the electric chain of light wave brushed past Taker's head, which he had accidentally left behind, and cut right into Taker's chest. Taker's mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say anything. Or rather, the power that erupted from his body had drowned out everything. It was a powerful explosion. Most importantly, it had formed a strong collision with Wang Yong's previously powerful but relatively restrained control mode. The air exploded and the abyss shook. The network of blood transfusion catheters that crisscrossed like a spider web in the room instantly twisted and ruptured. The blood and transfusion fluids that were still flowing through the catheters were thrown all over the place, creating a mess. Chapter 1057. Most of the liquid droplets that were flung out did not even have the chance to land on the ground before they were directly crushed or even vaporized by the extreme power that surged back and forth in the room. The entire room instantly turned into a full-powered boiler. The boiling air rapidly expanded, and in the next second, there was a second explosion. The floor-to-ceiling window on the side of the bedroom that led to the balcony couldn't withstand the air pressure in this narrow space at all and shattered with a bang. The curtains were wrapped in glass shards and twisted alloy frames. As if swept by a storm, they were blown to the lower deck and the surface of the sea beyond. There were also two blood donors who were originally lying near the floor-to-ceiling windows. They were also swept up by the storm and slid against the reinforced glass railings of the balcony. Fortunately, the reinforced glass of the railings was of high quality. In the relatively open space, it was still relatively intact, so the two unlucky people did not suffer too much. After the storm in the house blew out, it was the turn of the airflow from the sea to flow back, mixed with moist water vapor. The clouds outside were getting lower and lower, almost merging with the surface of the sea. It was as if a heavy downpour could happen at any time. To the people in the eye of the storm, these were meaningless details. However, with such a commotion, it was inevitable that things would go out of control. Leaving aside the chaos on the lower deck on this side, the gunshots and explosions that echoed from the advanced suites at the bow of the ship instantly pushed a large number of so-called upper-class people in the area into the illusion that they had been attacked by terrorists. Panic and chaos quickly spread. Compared to the imaginary commotion caused by the fragmented information, the explosion in the Abyss district that changed from restraint to unrestrained was obviously more intuitive for some people. Once again, the Jadeite light cruiser was too small for an extraordinary. Everyone was able to pretend that they didn't know anything during the first wave of attacks. But when the sudden and powerful clash appeared, the minds of the many extraordinaries, who were previously confused and dizzy by Luo Nan's endless scriptures, couldn't help but be roused. They cast their senses over here one after another. Everything was open and aboveboard. This was especially true for the few psychics. In fact, some of the B-class mental side experts could also sense this commotion. However, they were limited by their abilities, or perhaps they were directly scared off by the dangerous environment where extraordinary consciousnesses gathered. Without a doubt, attention was also a distraction. If it was any other time, it would have been fine. However, the current Wang Yong was being stirred up by the continuous changes. Once it dispersed. How unlucky. But then again, the way this energy works is so familiar. Who is it again? Regardless of the reason, Wang Yong's absent-mindedness had indeed given Taker some space and time to stretch himself. And Taker did indeed seize this opportunity. Well, let's just say he did. His body, which was far more robust than an ordinary person's, was driven by that explosive power. Like a bowstring that was released after it was fully drawn, he suddenly stretched out, not caring about any damage. Blood had already seeped out of his ears, nose, and mouth, and his eyeballs were completely red. It was obvious that withstanding this kind of power that exceeded the limits of the human body was a huge burden on his body. However, the fact that he was able to withstand this power without dying proved that he had the qualifications to struggle for survival. His mouth was still wide open, and no discernible sound came from his throat. There was only a muffled explosion that directly compressed the air and forcefully broke through Wang Yong's control. It was as if a clap of thunder rang in his ears. Even earlier than the thunder, there were bolts of lightning and fire. However, this wave of lightning and fire did not pierce through Wang Yong's back, but directly burst forth from Taker's body. This time, even if Wang Yong was a fool, he could finally capture that familiar feeling and turn it into a definite concept. Electromagnetic direction? Jin Tong. Wait a minute, Taker seems to be electromagnetic as well? Useful and useless thoughts constantly intertwined and influenced each other. While Wang Yong was absent-minded, Taker, wrapped in dazzling electric chains, charged forward like a mad bull, charging straight into Wang Yong's midsection. It had to be said that Taker's control over his power was extremely crude, and there were also some subtle and ambiguous areas in terms of its level. However, the power he was currently carrying had indeed become a substantial threat to Wang Yong. Wang Yong's eyes were cold. He returned a punch, parried his elbow, and lifted his knee. His perfect control over his power allowed him to effectively mobilize the blood and qi in his entire body. It seemed like he was defending, but he was actually using defense as offense. By relying on his perfectly synchronized interference and control over the material and spiritual planes, he dispelled Taker's powerful initial attack and seized the opportunity to counterattack. When his knee fell, the entire floor of the bedroom shook and deformed like waves, and the state of the room became even more unbearable. The electric chains that came charging at him were like flowing water. They streaked across the edge of Wang Yong's reef-like defensive force field. Even though a small portion of it managed to penetrate through, it only made one side of his body feel slightly numb. Wang Yong, on the other hand, took advantage of his steps to agitate the gathered blood and qi and fused it with the turbulence he subdued in the abyss region. With a hidden explosive force, he struck Taker's side abdomen with an uppercut. This punch was extremely ruthless. When it hit its target, Taker's body seemed to have been electrocuted. His body twitched and jumped, and the lower left half of his ribs were immediately crushed. The explosive sound that came from his wide-open mouth was also cut off by the bloody foam that came out from his mouth. Wang Yong furrowed his brows when his attack succeeded. Due to the force of his punch, the back half of Taker's body slid sideways. Taker's previous jumping was essentially like a slippery loach. It cleverly dispelled the heavy injury that would have dislocated all his internal organs. His body also fell to the side, coincidentally avoiding Wang Yong's attack. This should have nothing to do with Jin Tong or electromagnetic energy. Instead, it should be the foundation of yoga, which was a traditional practice in the subcontinent. This attack was completely Taker's instincts, and it had indeed reached the limit of what he could handle. His blood-red eyes had lost their focus, and his mind was completely muddled. The direction in which he fell was exactly where Tugu was. The entire bedroom was not very big, especially the area at the end of the bed. There were also the blood donors placed by the wall. Wang Yong, Tugu, and Taker were all extremely strong people. The three of them piled up there, filling up the entire area. Other than the moment when Taker broke through the wall, all his other movements had to be executed in the space of an inch. After all, Old Els was not completely dead yet, was he? Taker's fall had indeed caused him to crash into 2G's back. The electric glow on his body flickered, and he still looked very intimidating. Wang Yong reached back and grabbed Taker's back. It was also at this opportunity that Wang Yong glanced in front of Tugu. He saw that this expert, who was even more powerful than him, had just grasped the bright red tumor in his palm. Then he exerted his strength. Following an indescribable strange sound, the entire tumor was forcefully crushed by Tugu into blood and flesh. The blood and flesh splattered out from the gaps between his fingers. Some of the flesh directly hit Taker's face, and it was a bloody mess. So ruthless, but it's considered a success? Naturally, such a thought flashed through Wang Yong's mind. But in the next moment, a sharp and ear-piercing hissing sound exploded. It was filled with madness and chaos. The source of the sound was 2G's palm. Chapter 1058. This howl exploded strangely and fiercely. It had a kind of reckless intent of annihilation. Its characteristics were like a barrel of intense kerosene. It detonated in the abyss region and then rushed back to the material plane. A wave of interference surged. It was extremely vicious. Even with Wang Yong's abilities, his eardrums still hurt slightly. His mind became dizzy, but this didn't hinder his judgment. It's Black Lion. He left behind a poison curse. Black Lion ran amok in Africa. He was an expert in death and plague curse techniques. With the importance of the sarcoma, it was normal for him to set up a backup plan. But Luo Nen didn't explode it when he attacked Black Lion. He only released it now. What was the meaning of this? Caught off guard, Wang Yong was swept by the poison curse and suffered a small loss. Tugu, who was at the point of the poison curse's explosion, received an even greater impact. Wang Yong saw that 2G's sleeve, where he had crushed the sarcoma, had a clear ripple. The ripple traveled upwards, causing 2G's upper body to lean back slightly. The blood vessels on the side of his neck bulged slightly. But that was all. Tugu casually flung away the remaining flesh and blood from his palm. Half of his face was covered by his sunglasses, but no changes could be seen. This fellow's cultivation was truly bottomless. Wang Yong's heart was filled with regret, but he overcame the insubstantial effects of Black Lion's poison curse. His fingers clasped Taker's sleeveless clothes and fiercely pulled him back. Come back. Wang Yong didn't just pull Taker's clothes. He forcefully suppressed Taker's violent and unrestrained force field, not allowing it to affect Tugu in any way. Actually, Tugu had enough time to react, but he didn't pay attention to Taker from beginning to end. He displayed his absolute trust in Wang Yong. With Wang Yong's understanding of Tugu, trust wasn't necessary. It was more like a principle of comradeship. On the contrary, Wang Yong wanted to spit out. The electric light that activated Taker just now must have come from your side, right? In any case, Wang Yong didn't disappoint Tugu. Even though Taker was in a strange and violent state and Wang Yong couldn't completely control him, Wang Yong still forcefully pulled him back, not letting him touch 2G's clothes. Although Taker's will was muddled, his body's instincts were still there. He continued to struggle like a beast that had lost its mind. It was even more impossible for Wang Yong to kill him at this time, so he simply cooperated and used a joint technique, hoping to break the big black man's arms and legs to get the ball. The struggle in the tiny space still looked intense. Their joints collided, and the friction was electrifying. Strong winds blew in all directions, and even the cold sea breeze that blew in from the balcony formed a strong and disorderly turbulence. But in Wang Yong's consciousness, the situation was basically under control. He was able to faintly sense that the soul strength Luo Nan had projected had been crushed to pieces along with the fleshy tumor. Right? Only then did Tugu turn around. Separated by their sunglasses, they exchanged a tacit look. Then both of them frowned. Outside the window, the wind howled, and the sound of water roared. It was as if waves were crashing against the side of the cruise ship, hitting all the way to the floor where the suite was. There were really splashes of water splashing in, drenching the two unconscious blood donors on the balcony. Preposterous. This place was at least 60 meters away from sea level. If the waves hit here, could it be a tsunami? Of course not. It was just that the dark clouds in the sky outside had formed a waterspout within the turbulence of the atmosphere. The waterspout just so happened to hit the bow of the ship. The aftermath had yet to die down, bringing with it the airflow of water. It swept across the side of the cruise ship, bringing with it countless screams. There was even a thick fog-like cloud of smoke. Under the effect of the fierce winds, the smoke was pushed inside. It was stimulated by the leaping electricity in the air of the bedroom. Crackling sounds rang out. He went outside? Wang Yong immediately thought of Luo Nan. From his position, He could see the situation outside the balcony. His gaze had just drifted a bit when 2G's deep voice rang out, "Over here." "Where?" 2G didn't reply. Wang Yong looked over, but all he saw was the reflection of the dazzling sparks of electricity from the sunglasses on 2G's face. In the domain of pure vision, the flickering sparks of electricity still possessed an extremely powerful dominance over the current bedroom. Fine sparks of electricity interweaved in the air. They were reflected on the black lenses, and they reflected off each other. For a time, there was an extremely strange and gorgeous feeling. Wang Yong didn't have the mood to appreciate it. He had been alerted by 2Gu and had sensed some abnormalities. The main source of power was obviously Tacker. This beast had lost its mind, but it was still stubbornly resisting. Sparks of electricity flowed on its body, piercing through the air. It was the most eye-catching. However, whether it was 2Gu or Wang Yong, they both felt that the nature of electricity and fire, at least a part of it, seemed to have changed. The feeling it gave them was, this electricity and fire was not the same electricity and fire. Its nature was vastly different. To be more precise, it was a completely different kind of electricity and fire that had inexplicably seeped in. Ah 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 ah, a hoarse roar burst forth from Tacker's throat, interrupting Wang Yong's thoughts. This fellow's right elbow joint had clearly been smashed by Wang Yong. His left rib was also heavily injured. His body's functions were greatly damaged, but he still didn't seem to have an end. Even the explosive power within Tacker's body was being urged to rise without regard for anything else. It was like an overloaded steam turbine. The blades spun violently, and it could distort and collapse at any time in an ultra-high pressure environment. He had truly lost his mind. But how did Luonan do it? It was very clear that he had come to the conclusion that the situation was under control too early. Whether it was in front of him or in his senses, there was no sign of Luonan. However, the youngest extraordinary, who was merely projecting his soul strength, used all sorts of methods to announce his existence. He was just like an incorporeal and formless soul. He could see nothing, yet he was there. He might even be standing in front of them in the open, watching them with a cold and disdainful gaze. Wang Yong was already a bit impatient in his mind. The sweet had truly turned into a pot of porridge ever since Luonan started moving. The material plane and the mental plane. Control and anti-control. Destruction and anti-destruction. There were also unforeseen accidents that rose and fell in succession. It was as if there would never be an end to them. Yet these damned accidents always showed their dirtiest butts to Luonan. They only showed flattering smiles to Luonan. It was very easy for one's mental state to explode after encountering too many of these accidents. Wang Yong gradually came to a realization. Luonan's vision and level were clearly not limited to a simple line of sight. He wasn't restricted to people. He wasn't stagnant with objects. Instead, he was able to manipulate and mobilize all the operational resources in the surroundings, integrating them into an inconceivable domain. This was the difference between the mental side and the fleshly side. But for a 17-year-old kid to accomplish this, Wang Yong's hand suddenly went numb. It was Tacker, whose chest had been caved in and his hand broken. Tacker struggled once more, directly using his teeth this time. He turned his head and hissed, wanting to bite Wang Yong's throat. His bloody face was truly malevolent and terrifying. But that wasn't all. The speckles of blood and minced meat twitched and throbbed. There was electricity connecting and connecting to each other, connecting to each other. What was going on? Chapter 1059. Wang Yong would not be hurt by Tacker's desperate struggle. He exerted more force with his arm that was holding Tacker's joints. With a muffled sound from his shoulder blade, Tacker's body involuntarily bent down. No matter how white and sharp Tacker's teeth were, it was no use. However, looking at the extremely active blood and plasma on Tacker's face, as well as the crisscrossing electric network, Wang Yong finally understood where the alien electric fire that had inexplicably seeped into his body came from. Tacker no longer had the strength to fight back. Wang Yong also had the mental energy to ponder the mode of operation of this alien electric fire, but for a moment, he was completely clueless. He subconsciously freed one of his hands, wanting to exert some interference to see if he could use it to uncover part of the inner mechanism. "Don't move!" Tu Ji's shout pierced his eardrums. His sternness was unprecedented. Wang Yong's finger stopped right in front of Taker's face. Taker, who had been frantically struggling, also froze. Even Wang Yong was confused. Who was Tu Ji's shout directed at? Before he could clear his doubts, he saw that the blood and flesh on Taker's face, which were attracted to each other, were sinking down. Or rather, Taker's facial skin, together with the blood and flesh, had turned into clay or dough that could be kneaded at will. Moreover, it was much more delicate. Wang Yong saw that Taker's facial skin was torn apart by his fingertips, revealing densely packed blood vessels and neural networks. It was the most sophisticated circulation and control network of the human body that was accepting the foreign blood and flesh, threading a needle and stitching them together. It was precise and unbelievably fast. It was as if the front end of each other was a well-designed yin and yang magnetic pole that was perfectly fitted and matched each other. But this was definitely not the case for them. Then, this was simply a power of creation that erased all disharmony, turning this incredible reconstruction into the most relaxing and pleasant automatic process. This was the so-called uncanny workmanship. Wang Yong even saw some of the extremely secretive and crucial nodes of the circulation of qi and blood in the human body, especially in the head area. This was a detail that he had yet to fully explain. Wang Yong could not continue. Originally, he wanted to see Tu Ji's expression and reaction, but when he encountered such a miraculous scene that made him speechless, he forgot to raise his head for a moment. He also completely forgot about the idea of interfering and destroying. After 2 seconds, Tu Ji's thick and powerful palm slowly reached out from behind Taker's stiff body, as if he was going to do the same thing as what Wang Yong had planned. "Don't move!" This time, it was Wang Yong's turn to stop. Tu Gu seemed to have said something, but it was too vague for Wang Yong to hear clearly. However, it was also at this moment that the two extraordinaries beside them simultaneously sensed yet another tumultuous change within Taker's body. Wang Yong's feeling was more direct, because his hand, which was twisting Taker's shoulder joint, was suddenly bounced off by a strong magnetic field that suddenly increased in power. Taker himself, on the other hand, did not move. At this moment, he was no longer a powerhouse that possessed initiative. Instead, he had transformed into an exhibit that was constantly being innovated. The big guy, who was already riddled with scars, half knelt on the ground, his body stiff. But even though he was frozen to death, the powerful magnetic field radiating from his body was constantly interacting with the void around him. It was complex and deep. It was completely different from his previous berserk and restless state. Jin Tong. This was not the first time Wang Yong's mind had turned over this name, but this time, he blurted it out. At this very moment, Taker's converged and operated energy and force field had achieved the closest connection on a level. Taker was in the electromagnetic direction, and Jin Tong was also in the electromagnetic direction. However, it must be known that the electromagnetic direction and the electromagnetic direction were not the same. Powers of the same origin were fundamentally different in terms of structure and operation. This was the fundamental standard to distinguish extraordinaries from ordinary cultivators. Taker's initial eruption was very astonishing, but in the eyes of extraordinaries, there was still an enormous gap between him and Jin Tong. It was like the gap between the jadeite light and the ancient sailboat. But at this very moment, this essential gap of time and generation was inconceivably bridged and equalized. Even if it had not been tested in actual combat, even if it was just for show, it was still an astonishing achievement to be able to scare two extraordinaries. This was absolutely not something Taker could do. In this current situation, Luo Nan, and only Luo Nan, was able to use his inconceivable structure ability to complete this astonishing leap between generations. It seemed that the tumor, which had already been crushed, had played a very crucial role. The problem was, where was Luo Nan? What ability was this? What kind of operation was this? Wang Yong discovered that he had fallen into a dead end in his thoughts. It was fine if he did not think deeply about it, but once he did, he became so irritated that he wanted to explode. He should give up as a bodyguard. Therefore, he asked a person who was more likely to know the answer. Mr. Butcher. Before he could finish speaking, the wind whistled. His vision darkened, and his mouth and nose were blocked. Another wave of mist and clouds poured into the bedroom from the boundless sea covered by dark clouds. Compared to the previous wave, the mist was much denser. It was to the extent that one couldn't even see their fingers in front of them. On the contrary, when the lightning flickered on Tucker's body, a few silhouettes were illuminated. It was reasonable to say that someone of Wang Yong's ability would not be confused by it. However, the mist and lightning before his eyes were absolutely not the external appearance of the material plane. Visual experience did not count. In fact, the two did not undermine each other. On the contrary, they interweaved and blended together, connecting the material and mental domains to form their own layout. Wang Yong's mind swayed a bit in that instant. He practically believed that he had sunk into the depths of thunderclouds 10,000 meters in the sky. The floor beneath his feet, and even the entire environment of the room, lacked the sense of space-time. This was really wrong. He had really sunk into the domain of space and time. At this critical moment, the structure of Luo Nan's power circulation could not be concealed no matter what. He had completely revealed his cards. Wang Yong's blood and energy circulated and contracted, but his senses grew increasingly sensitive. He could vaguely feel the method, trend, and direction of the power usage. Dual drive. Tucker was one. There was also the mist within the mist. Suddenly, 2G's figure exploded. His long arms stretched out and pierced into the depths of the mist with a ripping sound. However, no blood splashed 3 feet. Instead, a flame inexplicably ignited within the mist, allowing them to see a piece of cloth burn to nothing. Severed. Luo Nan brought it in. Wang Yong spoke in a low voice. He had the impression that Luo Nan seemed to have said that this thing was a painting material. Luo Nan had tossed it here during the first exchange. As Wang Yong spoke, a strange and deformed phantom appeared where the mist and flame of the cloth met. It seemed to be the amalgamation of a cow and a spider. Presumably, it had suffered heavy injuries under 2Ge's fist force. It struggled for half a second before collapsing and scattering. It even let out a strange cry. The sound sank into the depths of the mist, but it actually carried the echoes of the distant deep space. It could be seen just how complex the environment and laws of a mere 20 square meters of bedroom had become due to Luo Nan's method of distorting space and time. Fortunately, this sort of space and time environment was destined to not exist for long. In fact, when 2Gu exploded with power and struck this monster, one of the driving axes, Wang Yong's energy surged as he responded. The fierce and tyrannical energy of the two extraordinaries interweaved with each other. It caused the already unstable chaotic structure of space and time to begin to sway and deform. Many parts of the structure collapsed and split apart. If this was a battle of life and death, everyone would have already begun to change moves. But the reality was that there was no back. Luo Nan's energy circulation framework, which he had just gained a bit of clarity, was completely withdrawn. It was so direct and efficient that the mist and cloud rolled out in reverse. They mixed into the cumulus clouds of the ocean and sky, which had nearly swallowed the giant ship. They fused together in the blink of an eye, becoming indistinguishable from each other. Wang Yong was stupefied. Such a strong start and weak finish really felt extremely awkward. Then he looked at the bedroom. First was the bed. Old Els was still the same. After 2Gu had crushed the tumor, he had cut off the path of Luo Nan's influence. He had been maintaining the bed ever since. Even though there were 2 waves of smoke and water scouring the bed, it was still relatively dry. It could barely be seen. As for the other places, it was so spacious. Where was he? Chapter 1060. Old Elsa's personal attendants and bodyguards were still there, but they had been knocked unconscious by the continuous impacts. But what about the blood donors? They were all gone. Wang Yong could not help but think, could it be that the cloud of smoke that swept out had already brought all of these people out? But there were a total of 9 people. They were distributed in every bedroom. It wasn't just the balcony, the ones by the window, but there were also those close to the inside of the room. There were even those right next to Wang Yong. Actually, Wang Yong was able to guess the general logic behind this. Luo Nan had placed them into the chaotic space-time domain, taking advantage of this opportunity to quietly move the blood donors away. He was even able to guess that the chaotic space-time domain that had enveloped them just now was a double-layered sack. One layer contained them, and the other layer was used to save people. This was the train of thought, but what about the details? These devilish details that seriously defied experience and common sense were enough to make one's scalp swell and blood rush to the top just by thinking a bit deeper. Wang Yong was struck by the rush of blood energy. He watched as the cloud of water vapor melted into the low-hanging clouds outside, and he was unable to restrain his emotions for a time. He took advantage of the fact that he could still vaguely grasp the traces of energy and information flowing past. He took a step past 2G's side and charged toward the balcony. His actions at this time were no longer the thoughts of a bodyguard. Instead, they were the most instinctive reactions of an extraordinary whose dignity had been violated. His body had yet to arrive, but his fierce blood energy was already like a heavy hammer. It smashed the glass railings of the balcony into pieces in one fell swoop. The glass shards filled the sky and shot toward the clouds outside. Wang Yong. Tugu rarely called out Wang Yong's name, but in reality, this call was a bit too late. Before the mechanical waves that pushed through the air could completely enter Wang Yong's ears, the glass shards that had shot out suffered a heavy blow from a certain force. A considerable portion of them were simply unable to withstand the enormous pincer attack from opposite directions. They simply turned into fine powder. But in the end, there were still some, perhaps due to problems with the point of force and angle of attack, that were preserved. They hissed as they shot back. Wang Yong actually did not dare to take them head-on. His mind was shaken, and his figure continuously slanted to the side a few times to avoid these dangerous shards. However, he could not avoid a sudden drop in speed. And in this gap of charging and sluggishness, there was actually someone who was a step ahead of him and appeared on the balcony without a sound or aura. Wang Yong's forward momentum had not ended, but the man's toes were on the edge of the balcony, and he stood exceptionally steadily. The distance between the two of them shrank rapidly, and in the end, their faces were almost touching. At such a dangerous distance, neither of them had the magnanimity and willpower to entrust their lives to each other. Both sides suddenly attacked. In the blink of an eye, fists, palms, fingers, elbows, shoulders, and all the other parts that could be used were continuously slashing and colliding like a storm. At that moment, 2G's voice finally reached them, but it was shattered by the ear-piercing sound of metal colliding. "Stop!" 2Ge's second roar exploded. This time, he had already used the sound kill skill. It was rare that he was so precise that he gave both sides a chance to stop fighting. The metal wind abruptly disappeared, and his chi and blood hummed quietly. Wang Yong took 2 steps back and returned to the bedroom. As for the one on the balcony, his toes were still touching the ground, and his back was against the sea, firmly standing in the same place. Her hair was short and neat, and her face was exquisite and bright. She was the chief master of the Eye of Secret Deeds, Lady Wan Luhua. Wang Yong stared at him with a sharp gaze, but he had already regained his composure. This was because at the same time, he could sense that Blood Demon's scorching and irascible aura wasn't far from here. Instead, it was the mental side that suddenly distanced themselves. It wasn't that they were afraid of anything. On the contrary, they were clearly bursting with curiosity. They were no longer concealing themselves. Waves surged on the mental plane as they chased after the traces Luo Nen left behind. Most likely, they wanted to figure out what was going on with the space-time domain technique that was practically perfect for combat. It seemed to be able to lift something heavy as if it were light. In the end, Wang Yong wasn't of the mental side. In fact, Wan Luhua had interfered and his attention was swaying back and forth. He had already lost the ability to sense Luo Nan's remnant aura. He didn't have the strength to chase after Luo Nan even if he wanted to. And at this time, the door to the room was pushed open once more. Blood Demon walked in while clapping his hands. The hole in the partition wall just so happened to expose his particularly proud, smiling face. Never seen this before, huh? If his main body was here, he might be able to do this. Wang Yong's words blurted out, but his mind had already spun in circles. But soon, he didn't have any follow-up. It was able to trap, or at least confuse, two extraordinaries for a short period of time. This proved that this domain possessed a certain bearing capacity toward high-energy targets. He had captured 9 people in one fell swoop, and all of them were fellows without any extraordinary powers. As long as half of them were able to survive in the end, it could be said that the living conditions of the internal space were acceptable. If this was true, then it would be solid proof that this space-time domain technique could indeed be used in combat. It would be the same even if Luo Nan's main body was here. There were no logical traps such as grasping or lifting. In other words, Luo Nan, who had grasped this technique, was practically invincible in a low-intensity battle against extraordinaries of the same level. As for a life-and-death struggle, further verification was needed. Then again, how many times had life-and-death struggles between extraordinaries occurred after the 90s? Wang Yong's profession was bodyguard. He didn't need to consider things that were too deep. But even if he used just a tiny bit of his idle brain power to consider, he could predict the wails coming from the administrator's camp. Someone really did scream. What the hell? Who did I provoke? Black Lion's fat and sturdy body squeezed through the door. He just happened to arrive behind Blood Demon. He raised his palm and smacked Blood Demon's shoulder. Did I provoke you? Blood Demon wasn't annoyed. He turned his head and bared his teeth in amusement. Go say that to the other side. I came and he left. You only came after he left. Blood Demon spoke the truth of what he saw. Black Lion chuckled. He puffed up his belly and strode into the messy bedroom. He looked around a few times and clicked his tongue a few times. Does anyone remember that this is my room? They also came to look for you, Blood Demon added coldly from behind. Look for me? Such good weather. Black Lion spoke carelessly. He looked at the dark clouds outside the window. His tone changed. I'm saying that with such special weather and everyone having nothing to do, we should at least go to the open-air deck and drink afternoon tea together. What's the point of messing around here? Blood Demon put his hands in his pockets and nodded. As long as it doesn't rain, your suggestion isn't bad. Whether it rains or not, isn't it a matter of a word from that person? But it's not a matter of a word here, right? It won't take too much. Black Lion strolled slowly to the head of the bed. He lowered his eyes and swept his gaze across Old L's face, which had turned purple and black. He curled his thick lips. I told you not to catch a family and take advantage of them. This doesn't seem to be the point. I mean, since it's already like this, why should we continue messing around for him? Tugu heard this and turned his head to look. Black Lion smiled at him. With a smile, he flicked his finger. With a muffled sound, a rotten watermelon exploded on the bed. Red juice and white flesh splattered everywhere. Done. If only I had done this earlier. The room was quiet for a moment, which made Black Lion's voice even louder. It's upstairs, the poolside bar. It's relaxing and pleasing to the eye. There's enough coffee, drinks, and refreshments. My treat. Chapter 1061. Chapter 579, Afternoon Tea, Part 2. In the end, Black Lion's slogan was just a slogan. It was said to be both relaxing and pleasing to the eye. The current atmosphere was not something that could be easily relaxed just by changing the location of the meeting to the pool deck. As for pleasing to the eye, the gunshots and explosions in the high-class suites area had long since scared the nearby upper-class people and all sorts of people. Coupled with the dark clouds that suddenly pressed down, it was definitely not suitable for outdoor activities. Right now, One could see that the pool side was completely empty. The usual scenery could not be seen. Constance and Wan Luhua were outstanding beauties among the people who came one after the other, but no one dared to persuade them to change into swimsuits, right? So the reality was that everyone was sitting or standing on the pool deck. All they saw were faces that were familiar to the point of no surprise. Only they were closer to the thick clouds in the sky. Their mouths and noses were filled with a slightly fishy dampness when they breathed. They could vaguely feel the rich free electrons flowing within a magnetic field that was so weak that it was like an illusion. Frankly speaking, no one liked this sort of environment. Interest was another matter. Constance and the star which rushed over under the drive of interest. Perhaps the death which was here as well, but she did not come out to greet them. Earlier, they had used their soul strength to track the traces of Luo Nan's spacetime domain. It was clear that the tracking was not very successful. They wanted to take this opportunity to meet and confirm. The problem was that Luo Nan did not immediately show himself. This caused this social activity, which was already somewhat unworthy of its name, to become more and more lacking in theme. Fortunately, the group of extraordinaries were able to quickly find a replacement. It was the only injured person on the deck right now, Tacker. This dark-skinned big fellow should be the most miserable one right now, judging from his appearance. His 2 arms were fractured, his left leg was fractured, several of his ribs were broken, and there were many contusions on his shoulders and neck. There was no need to mention the invisible internal injuries. Right now, his consciousness did not seem to be very clear. He leaned against the leg of a table under a parasol by the side of the pool. His head hung low as he accepted Wan Liua's bone setting. This treatment was quite high. The problem was that he did not show any signs of returning to his senses. His 2 eyes stared blankly at the surface of the pool in a daze. It was as if he did not know that he had become the focus of the extraordinary's eyes. Every bolt of lightning that flashed past his body was particularly eye-catching. Especially Constance. This top-notch world spiritist's line of sight penetrated through the shadow of his hood. He accurately captured the details of the interaction between Tacker's body and his body, the interaction between matter and spirit, as well as the even more intricate structure built upon those details. The so-called framework was in fact not intuitive enough. Most of it was half speculation and half deduction. However, for an expert such as Constantine, he could still integrate the fragmented information into a relatively intuitive, foreseeable result, and apply the result to a specific situation for further deduction. In the end, Constance no longer looked at Tacker. In her mind, there was only the perimeter, the conversion of electromagnetism, and the collision of the virtual and the real. Whether it was in the material plane or the spiritual sea, it formed its own system. They were all solemn and orderly, and their formation was strict. If this piece of Dharma was replaced with the abyssal region and made a deduction, there would be a heavenly lightning spear that was forged from the depths of the abyssal region. In the blink of an eye, it took shape and flew down. Lightning bolts flew everywhere, making it hard to distinguish between real and fake. This was no longer the feeling of a physical attack, but a mental attack. In particular, it was extremely familiar. Back on the island of Chan City, the mysterious expert had resisted her and Ma Luan's joint efforts to destroy Gong Qi's fleshly body. It was very similar. There is only one truth. It was hard to say whether it was mocking or joking words that flowed out from the hood. Does it look like it? Blood Demon suddenly popped out from the side. Did you also notice the card that was just played? Old Man Mi Chi's drawing materials and Luo Nan's handwriting. When combined together, it definitely looks like it. Constance frowned under the hood. It was clear that Blood Demon didn't want her to study it too thoroughly. He interjected and forcefully changed the topic. If Blood Demon was truly shameless, there really weren't many in the world who could do anything to him. I was just thinking that this year's new cards would be fine if they weren't played, but they would be played in 2 sets. One is a limited edition, and the other is a replica commemorative edition. The former needs the most recent ranking, while the latter doesn't change the current ranking. It serves as a commemoration of the previous era. There weren't many people present who were interested in Blood Demon's idea. Wang Yong, who was the person involved, was still brooding over the results and process. He recalled the details and asked from afar, "That toy can emit a power similar to the main body? Is it a transfer, a projection, or an imitation?" Blood Demon went, "Ugh." He didn't respond for a time, but there was no need for him to respond. Only half a second passed before the people at the poolside bar sensed something at practically the same time. There were clear warped ripples on the mental and material interference level that they could reach. From nothingness, an additional domain rolled out from the originally smooth structure of the void. It was like a flower that bloomed in an instant and then quickly withered. However, the space that temporarily expanded and bloomed was enough to spit out the group of people, allowing them to return to this normal world. No one died? The distance was a bit far. But it didn't matter. Aside from old Els, whose head had already been blown off, none of the extraordinaries present were particularly interested in these unlucky experimental subjects. Even if they had some extra purpose, they had to give face to the young and vigorous Mr. Luo. It wasn't good to immediately brush aside the young and vigorous Mr. Luo's face. More importantly, these people were sent several hundred meters away. The core energy belonging to Luo Nen appeared in the clouds above the poolside bar. Everyone shifted their gazes at the same time by chance. They saw a cloud rich in water vapor. It was as if it was being pulled down by a powerful sea breeze. Then it was blown away and took form. It was like a master painter splashing ink on a painting. At first glance, one could feel its spirit. It was none other than Luo Nan. However, this sort of shaping technique presented a flying energy that broke free from the bindings of concreteness. It was faintly discernible, faintly discernible. It was quite different from before. "Bro!" Blood Demon called out loudly. Luo Nen didn't respond. In fact, he didn't pay attention to the 7 extraordinaries here for now. Instead, he directly issued an order to a certain person to the side. "Professor Bai, go and clean up the mess with the blood donors. I've asked Sister Yingying to go over there. She can help out as well." Bai Xinyan arrived at the poolside deck. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to ask. She just needed to be self-aware. If she didn't do well, she would suffer. Bai Xinyan gave a slight bow and then left the deck. Only now did Luo Nan apologize to these extraordinaries. "I'm sorry. That water vapor fake body was scattered. It's difficult to reform and take form. It will take a bit of time. It's not convenient to talk right now. You guys talk first." The others didn't matter. No matter what reason Luo Nan took out, it was fine to just treat it as the truth. Only Black Lion, who had picked a seat first, sat down on his back. He chuckled and interjected. "Stonehead doesn't care about this. There's no need to give them a way out. They broke their legs. Who are they putting on an act for?" Wang Yong, who stood in a corner out of habit, tilted his head toward Black Lion. Black Lion's eyes couldn't be seen behind his sunglasses. Tugu acted as if he didn't hear Black Lion at all. He just stood not too far away from Tucker, observing quietly. He didn't seem to be annoyed at all. Luo Nen didn't respond to Black Lion's words. He didn't care if that person was embarrassed or not. This fake body that had yet to take form floated directly above the center of the pool, pulling away from everyone by the side of the pool. The moment he hovered, the water below him surged. Many slender limbs stirred the surface of the water. There was also a bull's head bobbing up and down in the water. The bull's head mooed miserably. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." Chapter 1062. Niu Gue was a very pompous fellow, but this time, he was probably speaking the truth. This was because his current situation was different from when he was chased by the ship's slicing blade, or when Luo Nen had lost his horns and his scalp under torture. He was in a state where his stomach was broken and his intestines were flowing out. A large hole had opened up in his chest and abdomen, where his mutation was the most severe. Blood mixed with a strange ghostly glow gushed out, quickly dyeing the center of the swimming pool with a layer of demonic color. This aquatic species was doing its best to stay on the surface of the water. It was afraid that the pool water would pour in through the hole and wash out its innards. If it had any. "This is interesting." Black Lion, who had been ignored by Luo Nan, knew how to have fun. He immediately slapped his thick thigh and revealed a mouth full of black gold teeth. Yes, the smell of incense under the sunlight. What the hell was their sunlight? But if he was referring to the Amaterasu order, then it was very appropriate. Luo Nan finally shot a glance over. Black Lion was very knowledgeable, but he didn't negotiate when it came to selling people out. The others might not be unaware of this, but their mouths were much tighter. Luo Nan still didn't respond. He turned his gaze back. The injuries on Nyogue's body were caused by Luo Nan forcefully summoning him from the spatial fault during their previous confrontation. Tugu had pierced through his body. Luo Nan had Mother Micah, so he didn't need it. He just used it as a cover to divert Tuji's attention. For Nyogue, this was an unexpected calamity. However, Luo Nan wasn't prepared to apologize to this cannibal. "I'm really going to die." Even though Nyogue had a broken mouth, he was indeed very weak from his injuries. He struggled repeatedly, but he was unable to float to the surface of the water. Instead, his howls became even more miserable. Finally, Luo Nan spoke to him. He was slow and unhurried. "It will be very difficult to make up for it. Do you want to change your way of living? I mean, change your way of existing?" No one in the pool or by the pool completely understood these words. Luo Nan didn't care about everyone's ability to understand. He continued to speak. "Actually, half of your body has already been stretched out, but you were pushed over. You don't know what to do next. Those who know won't easily tell you. As for me, I know a little, but there are some details that I still need to calculate." Luo Nan laughed to himself when he spoke to this point. "There's no point in telling you all this. It doesn't matter if you're willing or not. The current situation is beyond your control." "B-boss." The bull demon's screams also stopped. It opened its mouth wide, but it could not spit out a single word. It presented the image of a terrified bull head. It was actually quite comical, at least in the eyes of outsiders. To Nyoge himself, its brain had begun to turn chaotic due to its heavy injuries. It was no longer enough to support such complex considerations. Even the surging emotions were forcefully stifled in front of Luo Nan's false body of cloud chi, which focused more on the mind than the form. In reality, Luo Nan's fake body, which had yet to completely solidify, had already projected countless control lines that were hard to see with the naked eye and hard to pry into with mental senses. They permeated into Nyogue's body and completely controlled all of its functions. Nyogue quieted down. Luo Nan was already very familiar with this mode. Nyogue's body had practically no secrets to him. If he had to pinpoint a blind spot, then the blind spot probably existed in the connection between its chest and abdomen, the nothingness thicket region that radiated ghostly fluorescence. It was the crystallization of the Great Zay Order's Dark Dragon God belief system that had been accumulated and precipitated for many years. This structure, which was derived from the fluorescence, was the combination and distortion of a living being's belief. It was no longer dependent on the sensory plane. It formed a kind of pure mental expression that broke away from the concrete material form. This was the materialization of a plant-type belief system structure. Just as Meng Chong once said, this thing could be the embryonic form of the solidified configuration of the abyss region. It could also be used as the embryo of a sacrificial vessel of an order. It could be transformed into a priceless treasure in the domain of secret orders. However, Luo Nan's foothold was quite different. He focused his gaze on the tree of nothingness, which was growing dimmer and dimmer in the daytime. Nyogue could actually see it more clearly in its dying state. In this pure spiritual expression, there was a kind of strange vitality vaguely coiled around. Its relationship with Nyogue was like that of an infant in a womb, but it wasn't as pure. It was also like an insect egg within a host's body, but it wasn't overly sinister. It was neither close nor distant. It was both real and illusory. Luo Nan made a preliminary conclusion about this: fantasy breed. This tree of nothingness might be the embryo of a fantasy breed that was being nurtured. Of course, Luo Nan wasn't going to analyze the structure of the tree of nothingness or the fantasy breed embryo right now. Instead, he was trying to penetrate through space and time. He was going straight to the source of the belief of tens, hundreds, or even tens of millions of living beings that nurtured this embryonic fantasy breed. It was a piece of land hidden behind the nothingness, an abundant supply of food. Just a glance from afar was enough to cause an extremely pressing force to act on his mind. It was enough to scratch his heart and itch his liver. He couldn't wait any longer. To translate it into concrete words, it was roughly, hungry, hungry, hungry. This wasn't a natural reaction from his main body. It also wasn't a problem with the fake body he had recently created. Instead, it was a certain lifelike structure that was struggling to emerge from the thick layer of clouds that still maintained a close connection with the fake body. It was a bit similar to the tree of nothingness, but there was a world of difference between the two in terms of their operating methods and levels. Mother Micah. It didn't seem to be too accurate. Let's use Mother Micah for now. Actually, Luo Nan had already experienced this sort of thing once before. However, the Mother Micah he created last time had been hacked apart by a certain coward. Now that the remolded Mother Micah had taken shape, that sort of feeling returned. And the current Luo Nan was different from last night. Not long ago, he had just engaged in a short and high-level confrontation with two extraordinaries. The secret space-time technique he used proved its value in actual combat. The price was the collapse of the fake water vapor body, as well as the clearly lengthened reconstruction period. The fake water vapor body was affected by the high degree of fusion between the structure of the soul cloak and the Mother Micah. The characteristics of the Mother Micah had seeped more and more into the Mother Micah's body. It was to the extent that a simple configuration design was no longer enough to complete the corresponding construction. New fuel was needed. Luo Nan was hungrier than ever before. Therefore, he threw everything else aside and first dealt with Niu Gui's matter. It wasn't because Niu Gui's life was in danger. It was because Luo Nan was here that he could smell the fragrance of food. In a certain sense, this was progress. This was because Luo Nan had already extended a second end from the foundation of the Mother Micah's basic life structure. He had unearthed a driving force that could autonomously maintain this life structure. The apex. Chapter 1063. What is he talking about? Blood Demon rubbed his chin as he pondered. Actually, Luo Nan really didn't say much. He should have asked what Blood Demon was doing. Before Blood Demon could adjust his thoughts, the scene in the swimming pool made the extraordinaries beside the pool raise their eyebrows. They blinked, they looked pensive, and some simply sneered. Luo Nan didn't seem to make any obvious movements, but the ox demon, which had been struggling in the pool, went completely rigid. Its body began to expand at a visible rate, and then it began to wither. During this period of time, whether it was the head, the body, or the limbs, they all let out crisp crackling sounds. At first, it sounded a bit like the twisting of joints, but then it connected densely together. It was simply like a firecracker had been lit within the ox demon's body. In addition to its expanding and contracting form, it wouldn't be strange at all if the ox demon were to explode into mincemeat in the next moment. The perspective of a normal person was roughly like this, but a group of extraordinaries certainly wouldn't be this shallow. They could more or less feel the stability and regularity of this seemingly bizarre and intense transformation from beginning to end. It looks like this Mr. Luo has done quite a bit of research on secret orders. Black Lion, who had been ignored twice in a row, was still laughing merrily as he half reclined in his chair. He rubbed his round belly that was mostly exposed, actively participating in topics related to Luo Nan. Some people ignored him, but others were willing to talk. Star Shaman's thin lips trembled as he replied with a smile. It's the reverse output of life force. That ox demon no longer has any value in healing. Rather than tormenting itself with repairs, it's better to preserve something more valuable. However, the mental expression of the power of faith and incense interchanges with the energy of the living body. The efficiency is actually quite good. Constance muttered, the switching structure is truly beautiful. The three who were on the mental side were certainly able to see in much more detail than those who were on the fleshly side. Therefore, Blood Demon and the others didn't want to display their slight skill in front of an expert. They just spoke, having a deeper meaning of chatting. Is it really good to leave him hanging here? Yes, I feel that this child talker is quite pitiful. Blood Demon didn't have the slightest self-awareness of being the instigator of all this. Or perhaps he was more interested in Talker's current state. It's too far ahead, so I don't know what's going on. Say, with my friendship with him, it shouldn't be a problem to ask a few more questions. Hey, you've been doing this for so long and you still haven't found out anything? Wan Luhua simply replied, "This is not my style." Connections? In this world, who dares to boast that they have a way and can go all the way? Blood Demon sneered, "Sister Luhua, you can't be fooled by that old man." This time, Wan Luhua couldn't even be bothered to look at him. It was also at this moment that Talker, who had been silent for a long time under her hand, suddenly shuddered. His eyes widened as he let out a gurgling sound. The flashing electric sparks on his body flickered even more frequently and clashed with each other. The deeper layers of the magnetic field also entered a state of chaos. This was no longer a simple bone and joint problem. Lightning flashed in Wan Luhua's pupils. There were many details that were incompatible with her, but if she were to control it conservatively and simply control the chaotic chi dynamic, don't. Just as Wan Luhua was about to do so, Talker hissed and stopped her. In his widened eyes, his capillaries and ambitions were wildly expanding. Although he was previously seriously injured and looked miserable, his body's condition and level had always been improving. The level of electromagnetic power circulation had already risen to a level that he didn't even dare to imagine. Otherwise, how could he have attracted the attention of so many transcendents? Therefore, Talker had always been quietly learning, experiencing, and memorizing this feeling. He was also trying to make the circulation mode of this power truly imprint itself into his bones. If he were to change it rashly, this opportunity might immediately collapse. No matter what, he couldn't let this opportunity slip through his fingers. He panted heavily and did his best to enunciate his words to express his attitude. My opportunity has arrived." The problem was that the others had a different opinion. Wan Luhua frowned and immediately shook her head. "It's just an illusion. I can do it." Talker was in an extremely excited state. Even if the person in front of him was the authority of the transcendents who cultivated in the fleshly side, as well as a great teacher who taught and taught, he couldn't care less. "I can definitely." Before he could finish speaking, a voice like a cold wind flowed by his ear. "This isn't called an opportunity." The source of the voice was Luo Nan. That person was still above the center of the pool. He was just slightly distracted. He turned his head and made a conclusion. "You can't digest it." Talker was stuck with the appearance of the main character. There was no doubt that he didn't have the confidence to refute this young man who had casually given him the opportunity to climb to the peak. But Talker really wasn't willing to easily give up on such a rare opportunity. His mouth trembled for a long time before he forced himself to speak. "Give me a chance. Uncle Luo, I want to try." At a time like this, calling him Uncle Luo was really smooth. Luo Nan's reaction didn't change at all. In fact, he was just temporarily distracted. Right now, most of his mental energy was still focused on the ingredients. Yes, on yogurt. Luo Nan had even condensed water vapor to attempt a deeper segmentation foundation. He borrowed the achievements of the School of Fantasy to design a more suitable process for Niu Gui's current transformation process. He wanted to see if he could truly turn Niu Gui onto the path of a fantasy breed. This could be considered another verification of the structure of the mica. This was a very important matter. It was related to Luo Nan's main design for a period of time in the future. It was one of the most crucial links to complete the whimsical plan of a new plane simulation. However, Talker's weight wasn't low. In terms of practicality, Talker was even stronger. Of course, Talker's stubborn, greedy, and foolish choice didn't benefit anyone. Luo Nan decided to temporarily stop Niu Gui's transformation and design work to let Talker sober up a bit. So he crooked his finger at Talker. Tucker was stunned. He clearly didn't react. Luonan didn't expect him to understand either. Tucker, who was about to speak and plead again, suddenly went into a daze in the next second. Then he reached back to touch his throat, completely forgetting the fact that his arm was broken. The pain and the effects of his loss of function caused his arm to freeze midway as he lifted it. However, there was an eye-catching bulge in his throat. There was a clear foreign object wriggling upwards, squeezing into his mouth from his throat. Then it opened up his mouth and swelled out. It was a lump of bright red wriggling flesh. It looked like a creature that had been skinned and dripping with blood. It wasn't just his throat and his mouth. Even the pores on Tucker's upper arms and chest seeped out blood-red strands. They wriggled into lines and floated up. They seemed to have a magnetic effect as they blended together with the lump of flesh that had just protruded out of his mouth. They swirled and took shape. Some of the strands directly transformed into slender tentacles. They were completely separated from Tucker. They just stuck to the outer layer of the lump of flesh, fluttering in the sea breeze. Chapter 1064. Tu Gu, who was a little further away, Wang Yong, who was at the corner, and Black Lion, who was sitting on the round chair, immediately recognized it. This thing was the bloody sarcoma that was previously used as a key hub for blood transformation. It was first possessed by Luo Nan, then crushed by Tu Gu, and then seeped into Tucker's body. Now, it was actually extracted and reconstructed to its original state. Once it was extracted, Tucker's energy converged and operated mode immediately collapsed. During this period, Tucker did his best to maintain the mode according to his memories, hoping that this mode could be preserved. The problem was that this seemingly profound memory was nothing more than an illusion pieced together by various neurotransmitter stimuli after a series of key details were lost. The so-called mode was just a building made of feathers. It collapsed spontaneously without the slightest disturbance. Tucker completely lost his composure when the great road to breaking through the extraordinary door collapsed in front of him. His body suddenly bounced up, wanting to grab the power that had turned into nothingness. A muffled sound rang out. Wan Luhua felt that Tucker was too noisy and simply knocked him unconscious. The back of Tucker's head smashed onto the table leg and then the ground. He was completely unconscious. As for the bloody sarcoma that had just been extracted, it was still floating stably in midair. It continued to make fine adjustments to its appearance. It was still twitching slightly, just like a demonic creature, or the organ of a living creature. TSK Disket. He must have had a hard time suppressing his ambition all these years. The blood demon used the tip of his foot to poke Tucker's waist. Seeing no reaction, he shrugged. It seems that Sha Kyer has given him too much pressure. He even has a father like that. None of the extraordinaries present were interested in other people's melodramatic dramas. Everyone's attention had already naturally shifted to the bloody sarcoma. The star shaman seemed to be curious as he asked, "What is this thing?" "Oh my, Brother Luo is returning it to its rightful owner." The Black Lion jumped up nimbly and shouted, "Brother!" He clapped his fists and laughed loudly. "You guys can't understand how wonderful it feels to regain something you lost." As he spoke, he dashed forward, wanting to grab the lump of flesh that was suspended in the air. Unfortunately, a blood demon stretched out his hand and blocked him without any hesitation. "You said it's yours. Call it. Will it respond?" The Black Lion chuckled. "You're already an adult. Don't make things difficult for it, okay?" The two of them were engaged in a war of words, neither giving way to the other. However, the development of the situation did not change according to their will. Right when their spittle was flying everywhere, the bright red sarcoma hovering above the pool had already begun to float towards the center of the pool. It drew closer to Luonan's position. Hey! The Black Lion could not help but push the blood demon's hand away and jump into the pool. Of course, it wouldn't be too unsightly, because there was a floating cushion by the side of the pool. Yes, it was in the shape of a white swan for children or women. The Black Lion's fat body stepped on it, still holding the swan's neck. The small floating cushion did not sink to the bottom directly, only shaking endlessly. What the hell? Seeing that the black lion was so open, the blood demon could not bear to block him. He allowed the black lion to exert force with his feet, stirring up the water and swaying towards the center of the pool. In the beginning, Luo Nen did not pay attention to the reactions of the people by the pool. Most of his thoughts were still on Nyogure's side. Retrieving the bright red sarcoma that caused Tucker to go berserk was one thing. But soon he was more or less shocked by the actions of the black lion, just like the blood demon. As an extraordinary, the black lion might not be omnipotent, but he still had hundreds and thousands of ways to get to the center of the pool. He had to put on a more dignified appearance. The reason why he acted like an ordinary person, to the point of taking the initiative to kill Old Els, was probably because he wanted to express an attitude of not being an enemy. This included his previous actions, especially taking the initiative to kill Old Els, even if it was just a clone body. Speaking of which, Black Lion's previous actions of killing Old Els, aside from indicating the special status of extraordinaries, was equivalent to indirectly confirming that this fellow had an extraordinary relationship with Old Els. After all, Old Els wasn't truly dead. Wang Yong and Tugu had the status of bodyguards. It was their duty, so they actually didn't say anything. Several matters piled up together. Luo Nen had to look at the Black Lion in a different light. And the more things were like this, the more questions Luo Nen had. He wanted to obtain answers from the Black Lion. He waved his hand to brush away the beginning of the configuration design and looked straight at the approaching Black Lion. The Black Lion also looked at him. The two looked face to face. From a spectator's perspective, Luo Nen had the advantage. He was in a high position, looking down from above. In addition, the recently formed false body of cloud was blurry. It was hard to grasp the details of Luo Nen's gaze. The uncertainties were even higher. Luo Nen himself didn't care who was higher or lower. He just wanted to obtain useful information. The bright red sarcoma arrived a step earlier than the Black Lion. Luo Nen extended his hand, and the dangling tentacles seemed to have a mind of their own. They wrapped around his half-incorporeal arm. The tentacles maintained a pulsating frequency, and they interacted frequently with Luo Nen's false body of cloud. It was as if the tentacles could absorb nutrients from within, or perhaps they could take the things stored inside and seep them into the cloud. The Black Lion raised his head to look over. He didn't conceal his feelings of envy at all. He shouted from afar, "Brother Luo, how did you come up with these tricks?" At nearly the same time, Luo Nen asked him, "When you got this thing, didn't you have an instruction manual over there?" The Black Lion grinned, revealing a mouth full of sharp black and gold teeth. They seemed to flash with light under the dark clouds. "What do you think?" "Which side?" Luo Nen gave him a glance and shook his head slightly. He wasn't too satisfied with this habitual craftiness. If what followed was this sort of cloudy conversation, then it would be better to seize the moment and settle the matter of Nyogue. Yes, he reflected on himself for a moment. His explanation wasn't clear enough. Then, Luo Nen pulled back his arm slightly, clasping the still pulsating bright red sarcoma. He extended it out, allowing it to be displayed more clearly before the Black Lion's eyes. What I'm saying is that even though this reaction furnace is an insincere replica of the wreckage in the entire Earth, there should only be that Li Wei who can produce something like this. Luo Nen spoke halfway when the gazes of the 7 extraordinaries surround him focused on his body. There was a clear increase in temperature. Later on, a few of them even had gazes as scorching as fire, practically igniting his false body of cloud. The swimming pool sunk into a strange silence for a time. It was like a boiling solution in a sealed container. No one knew whether it would silently boil away in the end, or whether it would suddenly explode with a loud bang without warning. The Black Lion sunk into silence at first, maintaining a somewhat stiff smile. But his gaze was extremely lively. He didn't miss a single detail of the pulsating bright red sarcoma in Luo Nen's palm. Nearly 10 seconds passed. Just as someone was about to lose control and speak up for him, the Black Lion ground his mouthful of golden teeth. He injected a nearly malevolent liveliness into his stiff smiling face. He probably thinks that a headless fly that can't even see the road clearly won't be able to understand the instruction manual. Chapter 1065. A Headless Fly. Luo Nan repeated in a low voice. His meaning was quite subtle. It was hard to tell if he was mocking or something else, just like his blurred figure, face, and focus of gaze. In comparison, the bright red sarcoma in Luo Nan's hand, the reaction furnace, was more textured. The pulsation of this reaction furnace in Luo Nan's palm was still discernible with the naked eye. Due to its unique appearance, the young man looked like a murderous demon who had disemboweled and dug out his heart. However, its frequency remained relatively stable, emitting a unique vitality. Luo Nan knew that Li Wei had already sent this replica to the entire world to collect the special compound spores produced by infected mutants. But Luo Nan was still a bit surprised to see this from the Jade Light. Moreover, Black Lion had openly used it and even changed its use. So he gave a new evaluation. A headless fly. Mr. Black Lion is too modest. At the very least, not everyone can change the use of the mutant parasite that Li Wei split inside. Black Lion's hands were still wrapped around the neck of the swan. His belly was bulging, making the swan's slender neck bend into a very difficult arc. This posture was very laughable. He did his best to maintain a smile, letting the atmosphere wander on the verge of breaking. I've made a fool of myself in front of you, Brother Luo. I borrowed a ready-made mutant to graft. I got this result by accident. It was just a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. Graft? Luo Nan was deep in thought, but he didn't delve too deeply into it. On the other hand, Black Lion went from a headless fly to a blind cat. Didn't this mean that he had made progress over the years? Black Lion immediately said, Brother Luo, you still haven't told me. What did you rely on to make this toy play so beautifully? He just read the instruction manual. Luo Nan temporarily suppressed this ridiculing truth at the bottom of his heart. No matter how ignorant he was of the ways of the world, he could more or less understand the principle of speaking according to the person he met. As for the specific operation, that would depend on his performance on the spot. I probably studied seriously. Luo Nan shook the reaction furnace in his hand and answered. Of course, I need the corresponding train of thought and basic knowledge. Do you want me to explain the division, control, and reorganization of living organisms? The Black Lion let out a long "oh" sound. There were still doubts in his eyes, but he didn't get to the bottom of it. It was as if the previous question and answer had never happened. It seemed that after the initial sharpness, the situation seemed to have returned to the simple level of lacking sincere communication. Because of this, there were a few people who secretly sighed in relief. Around the swimming pool, the pressure cooker that was previously sealed seemed to let out a sizzling sound of steam. The top of the pressure cooker jumped, and the inside was boiling. It was temporarily free from the danger of explosion. The funny thing about the world was that some secrets were called open secrets in the circle, but since they were called secrets, there must be a reason for it. If you don't know, it means that you don't belong in this circle. You won't be able to stay in this circle for long. From the looks of things, Luo Nan and Black Lion had probed the edges. They were separated by a thin layer of window paper, but in the end, they were not able to pierce through, right? However, Luo Nan's thoughts were different from some people's. He actually didn't mind if he pierced through or not. In any case, ever since he discovered the message his father left behind in the tree hole next to Gear on the north bank, he had firmly nailed Li Wei, this visitor from beyond the heavens, to the position of being absolutely irreconcilable. Nothing could be better than to be able to pierce through this person's disguise and dig out his roots. He didn't expect to be able to do it in one go, but he couldn't shrink back either. A little bit at a time, continuously adding salt, would be able to marinate even the thickest skin and flesh. It was at this time that the blood demon by the side of the swimming pool began to raise his voice in protest. Hey, can you guys take care of non-professionals? It's very tiring for us to be here with our ears perked up. This was a typical gag, and the atmosphere continued to relax. Luo Nan turned his head and smiled at the blood demon. His face was blurry, but his voice and intentions were incomparably clear. Sure, I can talk about it in detail. Around the swimming pool, the atmosphere that had been relaxing suddenly froze. The blood demon was penetrated by at least 2 pairs of gazes. The hairy legs beneath his flowery underpants subconsciously trembled twice, but in the end, his face still revealed a smile that said everything was under control. Luo Nan's words didn't change the intentions of others. His mind stirred slightly, and the reactor clasped in his palm clearly swelled. Soon, the outer layer of the reactor's skin split open. Oh! It was unknown whether it was intentional or unintentional, but the black lion let out a series of sighs. It ground its sharp black gold teeth out of habit, and its gaze was glued to the newly exposed, bright red and complex organizational structure. Since the end of last year, when Luo Nen made initial contact with the Night-level basic colonizing biochemical reactor, researching its internal structure and modification plan became one of Luo Nan's most important daily assignments. Back in Spring City, Luo Nen seized the remains of a reactor and broke through Li Wei's distortions and abnormalities in the reactor's structure in one fell swoop. Luo Nen completed the reverse modification and restoration. The reason why he wasn't able to restore it to 100% was mostly due to the limitations of the materials. Luo Nen understood this. This little thing was already clear in his heart. Now that he was explaining it, he did it with ease. This reactor was originally designed to have 6 standard functional compartments. But right now, only the breeding room function remains. I don't know if it was like this when Mr. Li Wei obtained it, or if it was deliberately modified. As Luo Nan spoke, a large portion of the reactor structure was dissected and peeled off layer by layer, just like a dismantled model that had been made in advance. Only a small area was left in its original state. This was the breeding room he spoke of. Outside the breeding room is some kind of mutated living organism that possesses the function of a collector. Of course, Mr. Black Lion's magically modified version cannot be seen. The general structure is like this. Just as Luo Nan's voice fell, countless fine blood vessels and nerve structures were pulled out from the deeper layers of the bright red body. They were connected back and forth, basically forming a network. Then, layers of skin and flesh were wrapped around the outside. They were like many slugs glued together. The back of the reactor even showed twitching pulses of nerve impulses. The pulses were transmitted to the many tentacles on the outermost layer, causing them to tremble endlessly in the air. Even though the size of the reactor was a bit small, and the complicated changes in the details of the nerves and blood vessels weren't taken care of by the people who came into contact with it for the first time, the surrounding people were all extraordinaries. They wouldn't miss a single detail that they should see. And because of this, Luo Nan's series of operations made them unable to believe that this was just a simple imitation model. It couldn't be that he had directly copied Li Wei's design, right? Yes, compared to the reactor itself, the 7 extraordinaries were mostly more interested in Luo Nan's method of disassembling, assembling, and even producing the tissue structure of a mutated living organism. They had indeed grasped the main point. This was because the method Luo Nan was using right now had truly just been developed. In the past, he had to rely on the external neuron to form interference waves in order to achieve absolute control over the reactor. What he was doing today was the result of pure handwork. Luo Nan was able to accomplish this not only because of his experience and understanding of the reactor's usage, but also because of the refinement of the theory of configuration and superconfiguration. He also used the mica structure to carry out deep dissociation, segmentation, and reorganization. Even in the heavenly Yuan Empire, this was the technical support of a heavenly ladder. And the level was likely to be quite high. Unfortunately, Luo Nan wasn't particularly familiar with this technical method. He borrowed the reactor to demonstrate, taking the opportunity to increase his proficiency. It was impossible for him to go any deeper. His foot still landed on Li Wei's original design. I just said that this is a sort of collector. It should be used to collect the new mutated components that continue to appear on Earth. Using spores or genes isn't strict enough, but it might be a bit more vivid? Luo Nan didn't go too deep into this. This was the scale he grasped. He just shook his finger once more, allowing the magnets and light hidden within the temporarily constructed vascular neural network to continue to display their effects. The multi-headed slug that had just taken shape suddenly disintegrated and melted. It began to restore its original internal structure. From Li Wei's collector to Mr. Blackleon's transformation hub, forgive me for not being able to understand the process. It's still very chaotic. Mr. Blackleon? Blackleon suddenly came back to his senses. Ah, Brother Luo is talking about? Does Mr. Blackleon need to explain in detail? No need. I just said that it was just a stroke of luck. Currently, the path of mutated research is still in its barbaric growth phase. Only a few advanced research organizations like Los Angeles City's Clay Laboratory and Sakura City's Ping Trade Experimental Zone have relatively clear and applicable results. I relied on the geographical advantage and a bit of luck to accomplish this. The corner of Blackleon's mouth twitched as he spoke. This accomplished had nothing to do with him now. He didn't expect Luo Nan to return the reactor. Luo Nan really didn't have the intention of returning the reactor to its rightful owner. Although the main function had changed, Luo Nan still discovered a batch of collector from the breeding room of the reactor. Luo Nan was unable to enter deep analysis through the virtual brain system since he wasn't connected to the external neuron. Luo Nan didn't know how many of the advanced formula ingredients Li Wei needed were in there. In any case, he wouldn't be funding the enemy. Since Blackleon was hiding his abilities, Luo Nan didn't need to continue demonstrating. After restoring the reactor, he asked about non-technical matters. Of course, it was still related to Li Wei. I always thought that Li Wei treated this thing as a shady business and did it quite covertly. Now it looks like the situation is a bit more complicated. Mr. Blackleon, are you collaborating with him in research? Research? Researching the puzzle-solving abilities of flies? Blackleon laughed self-deprecatingly and patted his own belly. Actually, I always thought that this was the spoils of war from the Deep Blue World. Chapter 1066. Deep Blue World. This was a sensitive word for Luo Nan. His attention was diverted a bit, and he asked, "You've been to the Deep Blue World? How hard can it be?" Black Lion's palm could rub flowers on his belly, but it made him appear more relaxed. His expression of sudden realization was extremely vivid. "But you came from Xia City. No wonder. Although I can't say that every extraordinary knows about the Deep Blue World, I'm afraid that Ouyang Chen is the only one who is still kept in the dark despite his high status and ranking. He's a pure technical person. His connections are truly the shame of the extraordinary." Luo Nan looked at him very seriously and responded, "You guys are afraid of me." Did Black Lion really think that he didn't know about the messy matters within the Ability User Society and among the extraordinary? Forget it. I was the one who didn't keep my mouth shut. Black Lion decisively gave in. Then he smacked the swan's neck with force, emitting muffled sounds. "So what if you know the location of the Deep Blue World? The Mariana Trench isn't a place you can casually go. Brother, do you really think that as an extraordinary, you can ride this toy and dive 10,000 meters to the bottom of the sea?" Not necessarily. Luo Nan responded simply, but he was deep in thought. What kind of water vapor configuration could resist and even utilize the vile, high-pressure environment of the deep sea? Black Lion emphasized, in the enormous Earth, Poseidon is the only one who can come and go freely without relying on specialized deep-sea ships, including the extraordinary. As for other people, so what if they come to the Deep Blue World for a 7-day tour, a 10-day tour, or a long vacation tour? What they see is what Li Wei wants them to see. The topic was a bit off topic, but the general direction was clearly deeper. So Luo Nan was willing to continue the discussion with Black Lion. "According to what you're saying, doesn't the Deep Blue World become Li Wei's private property? Whatever he says goes. You guys and investors like Old Els, all let him do as he pleases? Old Els." Black Lion's attitude was quite disdainful. It was the same attitude as when he had exploded Luo Nan's head with a finger. Old Els is nothing but a pitiful worm with his balls pinched. As time wears on, he has less and less strength to fight back. Oh! Otherwise, why do you think he would come to such a small trade fair? Li Wei didn't even need to say anything. It was just Wang Yu's promise that she would draw out the in-progress results of the Bloodline project in advance to help him extend his life. That's why he came over eagerly for the Distortion Technology Exchange Conference. In fact, those who are familiar with him know that Old Els has never been interested in distortion technology. He is happy to use it to earn money, but he would never want to bet his future on it. The amount of information contained in these words was quite large. Luo Nan digested it as he blurted out a question. He doesn't like mutants. But what else can it be? Because of his greed, he has always wanted to take the orthodox path, and because he believes that only by studying the evolution of supernatural abilities step by step can he truly gain a brand new life so that his ugly, rotten, stinky skin can regain its youth. The Black Lion freed his hand and gestured with his thumb, index, and middle fingers. Then he pressed his thumb back. It's a pity that this path came to an end a long time ago. It used to be a fork in the road. This path is no longer popular. At least, it's not mainstream now. 3 forks? Luo Nan thought for a moment. One is orthodox evolution. The other is mutant technology. What's the last one? It's the Bloodline project. The Apocalypse Laboratory is currently pushing hard. Who knows how many old dogs are sticking out their tongues right now, waiting to lick their bones to quench their cravings. The Black Lion still didn't hold back with his words, but he still maintained respect for Luo Nan. Speaking of which, this isn't really suitable for a long chat. How about we go get a cup of coffee? Adding a bit of other liquid ingredients to this fake body seems pretty good? Luo Nan could see that the Black Lion was trying to regain the initiative in the conversation. For this reason, he spoke of all sorts of dark secrets, not even bothering to beat around the bush. Of course, he probably really did have the habit of selling people out. It was also possible that these things weren't considered to be amazing secrets within the circle of extraordinaries. Sure, it's good to go replenish its water. Luo Nan agreed quite straightforwardly. Luo Nan didn't mind temporarily relinquishing control, as long as the other brought out enough information for the price. He really wanted to observe the reactions of the others up close. He wanted to see Li Wei's position and influence in the hearts of these extraordinaries. Luo Nan put away the reaction furnace as he spoke. He tossed Niu Gui into the middle of the swimming pool and turned around to float back to where Blood Demon and Wan Luhua were. Luo Nan's position. Black Lion gave up on the White Swan in a straightforward and efficient manner. He leapt onto the shore of the pool, sticking out his belly and his face to play host. The level of the jadeite light could be seen at this moment. Even though not every management and service staff possessed the ability to view supernatural phenomena as ordinary, there was always a need for customers. There were always enough people. A group of strictly trained service staff were already in place while Luo Nan and Black Lion were conversing in the center of the pool. Now they were serving drinks, beverages, and refreshments like flowing water. These esteemed guests had to be satisfied. At the very least, they couldn't find any mistakes. However, no one would take these refreshments seriously. Aside from Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, who had a rough idea of what was going on and could be ignored for the time being, everyone else had their own plans. Black Lion had finally managed to invite Luo Nan back with great difficulty. If they didn't probe the thoughts of this young and headstrong expert now, when would they be able to do so? Well, directly probing wouldn't be appropriate, so they would chat first. It just so happened that the 3 forks in the path of the evolution of extraordinary powers were never outdated topics among the upper echelons. Everyone had something to say, more or less. Luo Nan's knowledge was greatly broadened. Combining the information from various parties, he was able to understand that evolution, mutation, and bloodline were the 3 most important research directions that revolved around the evolution of life and extraordinary powers in the last 20 to 30 years. Among them, evolution was to use normal people and metahumans as a frame of reference. With genetic science as the foundation, They researched and created an ability matching and point adding route in an attempt to deduce the perfect template for human superpowers so that normal people could make the leap to metahumans and continue to evolve. This research path was once flourishing. Many people benefited from it. There were even some people present who obtained inspiration during that stage, allowing them to ascend to the level of extraordinary in one fell swoop. Master One rose up during that time. Blood Demon directly pointed out his name. "Aren't you?" Wan Luhua responded with a question. "I'm Wild Fox Zen." Blood Demon laughed, but he didn't deny it outright. "I fattened up quite a bit that time. My fleshly body. Of course, more of it collapsed." Luo Nen listened to them talk about old times. He didn't interrupt. He listened with great interest. During this time, Luo Nen felt as if Wan Liuhua's gaze had shifted a bit more to his body. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.